Old diary entries of a villager. A new resident came to their village. His face was quite repulsive to me. It was a fairly young guy. Everyone was unsurprised. It was rare for anyone to come to their village. The man's eyes were angry, as if something terrible had happened in his life. Few people wanted him to live here, but the good-natured elder accepted the stranger. 3 days had passed since this young man had settled in their village. He was quite quiet. A couple of curious residents began to take an unexpected interest in the stranger. While the narrator didn't care what was going on there, he barely paid attention. Another week has passed, and then another 3 days since the stranger arrived in their village, and the narrator has managed to find out what he does. The kids peeked over the fence and told him. The stranger practiced with a sword every day. He looked like he had a whole baggage of history behind him, yet the man still didn't care. Almost a month had passed, and the young man was still practicing in his yard. So another month passed without any change. The stranger was preparing to take revenge on someone. There was a big fuss about it. People started to get interested. Farmer decided to go and see him training tomorrow after all. The man was beginning to take an interest in this stranger after all. Anybody could have had a hard time with that. However, when the man saw the training, he was completely disappointed. To the villagers who know very little about swordsmanship, the young man might seem incredibly strong, but in reality, it was different. He must have some reason not to stop, but it must be a very good one. The man stepped away from the fence and slung his duffel bag on his back. Silly little, he even felt a little sorry for him. Soon, there was a new family in the village, a retired mercenary and his son and daughter. My daughter's name is Rima. She's a very beautiful girl. Her smile turns her into a real angel. An inexplicably strange mood brought the narrator to pen and paper for the first time in a long time. For 2 years, he courted this girl, and she finally agreed to become his spouse. There was one strange thing, though. That guy wouldn't get out of his head. 5 years is a long time. While others are living happy, angry, sad, he's still practicing. 5 years, 1 month, and 12 days, the young man has been practicing. As month after month passed, the young man was already transforming before his eyes. And so another year went by, and still he kept practicing. Again he practiced. His persistence was to be envied. 6 years and 9 months. By then, the man had already had a child, a beautiful daughter named Lola. Now, it's been 7 years and 10 months, and the man's still practicing. He raised up his huge, weighty sword, the blade pointing straight up into the sky. Suddenly, a heavy downpour began. But even then, the man continued his training. He went high into the mountains. It's been at least 15 years. Today, the man forgot to check the training of this non-dating. In that time, he'd gotten so used to the man practicing that he had no idea what he might be doing besides that. A lot more time has passed. The man has grown older, has a large family. He was lying on his bed, and suddenly, a little boy, his grandson, ran up to him. A woman's voice came from somewhere and ordered the boy not to disturb his grandfather. A beautiful girl came out of the door and approached the boy and told him that he had to get ready to leave soon. It was the farmer's daughter, Lola. She grew up and became a beautiful girl. The man got up from his bed. The old man asked, "Where are they going?" The girl replied that she wanted to go with her son to the market in the neighboring village. The old man smirked. Soon they packed up and left the house. Grandpa just watched them through the window. The thought crossed his mind. Perhaps he should take a walk around the village. He went outside and breathed in the clean air. The weather was beautiful today. He walked down the main street. Everyone was happy to see him. He was already the elder of this village. The man walked quietly along the forest path and pondered. Even the village had changed a lot in that time. Everything was changing, except for one thing. The man stopped. He moved his eyes to the side. There was a very familiar place there. Everything was changing except one thing. Behind the broken gate, it was silent for now. It's been over 37 years. The gates have had a decent amount of time to break down and are overgrown with moss. The man decided to look inside and check on the strange man. However, what he saw there made his heart beat faster. Something changed. The man snapped out of his seat and ran to his house. He literally flew into his yard and saw a strange sight. The man was very out of breath and looked before him with surprised eyes. He saw powerful hands holding the hilt of a huge sword. The same man who had been practicing all this time finally stepped outside his yard. He was sitting on his knees. He had long gray hair. So far, he hadn't said anything. He sat with his eyes out, not letting go of his sword. When the silvery light that surrounded him faded, the man laid him on the ground and closed his eyes. He felt incredibly sad, as if he had lost something very important that was already a part of his life. With trembling lips, he wished the man would find himself in a place where he would feel good. My eyes snapped open. A bright light forced me awake. The boy lay in his bed, breathing nervously. It was a very strange dream. It was the Pereira Manor, a luxurious palace. It was located in the southern part of the Kingdom of Hale. It is a famous place of trade that connects several kingdoms. The guard who was standing at the entrance raised his finger up and said in a proud voice that this is the most popular people here. Two of his companions stood nearby and listened with their mouths open in amazement and admiration. One of the guards didn't believe the stories his companion was telling, and for a moment he doubted it. He did not believe that the count's daughter had already obtained the status of a sorceress, but the man wasn't convinced. So what? They still have an older son. For a second, there was silence between them. Suddenly, the senior exploded. Why is it that they don't watch their language in front of a newcomer? His comrade laughed. Yes, Princess Curlia is indeed a celebrity, but eldest son Iron is much more famous. He was nicknamed the Careless Aristocrat because he was a terrible slob. After losing his mother at a young age, he did nothing until his 15th birthday. On the other hand, his mother was the person closest to him, so this guy is understandable. Suddenly, the guard's conversation was interrupted by a woman's voice. What are they doing here? The guards turned and looked away with disgruntled glances, but immediately a chill ran down their backs. This was Lord's second spouse, along with his adopted daughter. The girl looked at the guards with a look of contempt. The guards bowed lower and nodded their heads. They understood, and it would not happen again. She asked who authorized them to make noise at the post. The guards were speechless with fear and immediately bowed low and apologized. The girl didn't seem satisfied with that. How are they going to answer for their offense? Amelia was eager to stop it, however the girl wasn't going to. The woman smiled and said that seemed to be enough. They had already realized the mistake, right? The women went on their way, and the head guard looked over his shoulder at them. They stood at attention because they were afraid of being caught again. As the women disappeared around the corner, the men sighed heavily. We could relax. Yeah, that little princess is something else. Mrs. Amelia was intimidating too. The prince, on the other hand, was the exact opposite of her. Some sighing could be heard in his room. The guy was sitting on the bed, and he seemed very annoyed about something. He couldn't sleep, and it was driving him crazy. He was ready to tear up his blanket. Usually, at this time he slept, or rather to say always, almost all day long he slept. However, after that strange dream, something had changed, and now he felt as if he were out of place. He had a brackish taste in his mouth from fatigue and a screaming ache in his muscles. The guy got to his feet with a slight movement, and something was very important. He looked at his hands and didn't seem to recognize them. His whole body itched unbearably. The guy couldn't even stand still. It just pissed him off. He called for someone, and the door creaked open. A servant apparently looked in. He politely inquired what the little prince wanted. The boy didn't even know what to say. His eyes raced, and he couldn't think of the right word. The man stood and listened intently to the boy waiting for his orders. The boy gathered his thoughts and stammered, and said that he wanted to train with a sword. The man didn't fully understand yet, and continued to stare at the boy. It soon reached him, however, and his eyes widened with surprise. He asked again. Soon, they found themselves at the training ground where the warriors usually practiced. The knights looked in surprise towards the newcomers. They couldn't completely believe what they had just seen. A whisper broke through the rows of people, and everyone began to discuss. The boy walked forward with a light, uncertain gait. The lazy prince was out on the training ground. It was simply unthinkable. It's usually hard to catch even his face. Why did he suddenly decide to train? Is he really going to take up fencing? I still couldn't believe it until the end. The boy walked over to the gun rack and began to examine it. The servant followed steadily and told the boy that each weapon had its own peculiarities. If His Majesty wished, a good craftsman would be handed over to him. The boy refused. He wanted to choose everything himself. The man was silent. Iron. Continuing to look around the weapons rack, he still had no way to choose. Suddenly, his eyes locked onto something. He seemed to have already made up his mind. His hand reached for the huge sword that was almost as big as him by itself. One of the guards did not believe it and asked to pinch him. His comrade immediately complied with his request. Making sure it wasn't a dream, the head of the guard grabbed his comrade's arm and ordered him to let go. The boy tried to lift the heavy sword. It was hard for him to do so, as if it weighed a ton. The guards turned around and their eyes widened in surprise. They couldn't believe their eyes at first. The servant was also surprised to the core. He had not expected such a thing from the young prince. Though with great difficulty, the boy managed to lift the heavy sword. His entire body was shaking from the tension, but he did not retreat. Back. He was breathing hard, and he felt like he was going to break in half. He looked at the second weapon rack, where many smaller swords stood. Iron swung, which cost him a lot of effort. He wanted to strike with his weapon, but all he could do was bring him to the ground. The people watching this sighed heavily. It was ridiculous. These were experienced knights, and it was a real treat for them to watch such a thing. However, the guy wasn't going to give up. He fractured himself and swung his sword again and again. The knights were already discussing him loudly. One of them said that Lord Chiron had disgraced this guy last month. Yeah, the other one brought up something like that too, and the prince didn't even say anything back. He's basically incapable of anything. Eventually, they got tired of watching the inept prince and went back to work. They chattered to themselves, and the servant heard everything and slowly boiled over with rage. He tried to talk some sense into the boy, saying that in order to master the sword, one must practice every day and practice hard. He wanted to suggest that he hire a good coach, but the boy wouldn't even listen to him. He continued to swing his weapon. He felt that every time he swung his weapon, all his muscles were literally screaming with tension. A question stuck in his mind. Why? He swung the heavy blade once more. His stability was lacking, and he immediately tripped over his own feet. The boy flew forward, the weapon slipping from his hands. Only a faint sigh escaped his mouth. It hurt quite a bit. He wondered, why does it feel so peaceful at this time? The boy was lying on the earth. With great difficulty, he tried to rise, still holding onto the hilt of his weapon. He repeats over and over what he dreamed, and each time the heaviness in his chest eases. Every time he takes a swing, all the memories that have plagued him his whole life literally evaporate. He swung his heavy sword once more. He felt he couldn't stop. He wanted to go on and on. It was as if someone else was directing his movements. The boy swung to strike again. Servant stopped him at the last minute. He didn't even feel anything. The boy was faintly aware of something. The man yelled that he had to stop. It's getting dark. The guy seemed to come to his senses. What the hell is it evening already? He felt his body weakening. Consciousness began to leave him, and the boy tried to stand on his feet, but immediately fell backwards. A servant picked him up just in time and began to wail. The boy whispered that he had no more strength. However, he didn't understand how that was so. The man explained to him that the boy had overexerted himself very much today. At last, he himself realized that the sun had already set. Time had flown by very quickly. The man tried to drag him. Iron said he was just standing there waiting. He would have been better off going about his business. The man said he wouldn't dare leave him. The man said he would order everything cleaned up here, and the boy needed to rest. Iron said he didn't think he'd be doing it again. Tonight, his whole body ached. He felt like he was dying. Muscles ache. Bones feel like they're breaking. What kind of dream was that? Now he wouldn't be able to sleep. The boy lay in his bed, but he was still as sick as ever. 5 minutes later, he was sound asleep. His mind had simply shut down. It's been a couple days since the guy first picked up a gun. Iron was eating a huge sandwich with both cheeks. For some reason, the boy was hungry. A hearty breakfast was before him, and he was devouring it with satisfaction from here. From the outside, it looked like he hadn't eaten in days. The servant stood beside him and asked, "Is he going to go train today too?" Iron purred affirmatively. There was something strange with him today. From the moment he had the strange dream, it began to haunt him, and to get rid of the itching in his body, he must exercise. How can I put it? When he's swinging a gun, there's no extra thoughts in his head. Needed to eat a solid meal before he planned to get a good workout in. He asked for more milk. People were already starting to pull up. They were incredibly wondering what was going to happen this time. The guards were diligently discussing and arguing who will triumph today. The newcomer wondered. He had no idea. Suddenly, someone asked them politely for directions. In front of them stood a small old man dressed in a red hooded cloak. The guard asked who he was and where he was going. The old man replied that he was a traveling knight. And of course, he has a permit. The old man started digging in his pockets to find a piece of paper. The chief of the guards said it was not necessary. Let him wait until their shift was over, and then they would see him off. The old man thanked them. Soon, they came to a massive gate. Here was the main entrance. After they saw what was going on behind the doors, the guards' eyes rounded to the extreme. Prince came to the training ground. Indeed, for the 4th day in a row. The newcomer was glad that he had won the argument. The chief of the guards looked at him and sighed heavily. Reluctantly, he handed the boy a pouch of gold coins. Let him take it. It was really unbelievable. The prince has been practicing hard for 4 days in a row. Isn't that because he embarrassed his father so much? The chief of the guards heard that and got angry. Ah, what a bastard. But immediately, they tried to calm him down. The man was furious. At this time, he said nothing, just observed. A furious argument came to his ears. He looked at the boy and realized, surprisingly, that he was doing quite well. He certainly doesn't waste any time. However, his skill level is not good. He was so weak that he could hardly hold the ball in his hands. He was breathing hard and almost fainted. The old man assumed that all the wine was a grudge against the lord of the neighboring manor, except that one should not take the art of weaponry lightly. The old man figured this guy wouldn't last long, and he'd soon drop his hands. The old man had no time to finish his thought, for a terrible wind came up all around. The guards raised their heads upward and looked up in horror. Iron also stopped practicing and looked up at the sky. The boy was very tired. There was a huge creature circling in the sky. It was a huge, legendary griffon. Kirlia sat riding the beast and skillfully controlled it. The griffin is a creature of legend that does not exist in reality. 197. He had a lion's body, eagle wings, and a powerful beak, and his skin was as strong as steel. The guards could not believe their eyes. They had never seen such a colossal monster. The girl jumped to the ground easily, as if she was almost weightless. The griffin landed beside her, its powerful claws digging into the paving stones. The girl petted her pet. The fur was very stiff. Create an animal with your own hands, and then put a soul into it and make it alive. Such was the ability of this young mistress. The girl shifted her gaze to the side and turned to the guard. The newcomer, who had been watching the marvelous beast all this time, was beyond terrified. The girl began to enter with her eyes in different directions. Her eyes showed that she was extremely dissatisfied. She looked another guard, who had also turned white as chalk. Then shifted her gaze to the petty officer, who in an instant lost all his courage. Then she looked at the old man and asked who he was. Grandpa waved his hand and said he was a traveling knight. The girl, still standing beside her pet, asked, "Is it after hours? What are they doing here?" The knights immediately stood at attention. The petty officer waved his hands and said that the post was already manned by a guard who had an afternoon shift. It's nothing like that. They wanted to say something else, but the princess was furious. They dared to argue with her. Here the girl heard her brother addressing her. Iron looked at her with a surprised look and asked, "What's the matter? Why is she so furious?" Kirlia looked at him as if she had hated him all her life. It was clear in her eyes that she was very unhappy about something. She wanted to say something. The girl looked away, trying to find the right words. She ended up asking, rather rudely, "What is he even doing here?" "Make him stop." The guy wondered, "What exactly?" To which the girl replied that he didn't need to do this useless nonsense. The boy answered nothing, but only looked at his sister with a sad look. He didn't want to answer anything, but just looked away and continued his training. The girl looked at him with an even angrier look. She began to slowly boil over with rage. She could see the boy's hesitant grip on the sword. It pissed her off. Finally, she exploded. She said, "Does he think swordsmanship is easy? All he's been doing this whole time is sleeping. And now, all of a sudden, he's going to change. Why would he do that?" The boy had been trying to ignore it all this time. Kirlia wanted to jab him as hard as she could. She said that his skill was simply worthless. Even this rookie is better with weapons. Don't let him say that this whole circus is because of what he was told 2 weeks ago. Griffin whirled his head in surprise. Suddenly, from somewhere, a gentle female voice called out to the girl. Mrs. Amelia was coming down the stairs. The woman looked fondly at her children and told the girl not to disturb her brother and to move away from him. The princess wanted to object, but the woman immediately interrupted her. Kirlia frowned, but still remained silent. The girl was furious. Amelia wished the guards well, and the men immediately straightened up. The woman looked at her son and said cheerfully that he seemed cheered up. Just don't let him overdo it. Iron looked at her and nodded his head. The boy continued his training. Mrs. Amelia and her daughter headed for the exit, leaving the guards to watch the prince. The men sighed heavily. It was really close. They were afraid they were going to get screwed again. Suddenly, the griffin seemed to come to life and gave a loud bark, scaring the guards out of their wits. And why didn't the princess take her bird with her? The old man watched all this and smiled quietly. He was well aware of the rumors that were going around about this girl. The man immediately continued to watch the boy. It was worth noting that the whole mess didn't shake his concentration in the slightest. The boy kept standing and practicing hard. The old man wondered if he should have watched this boy for at least a few more days after all. Night had fallen on the estate. Everyone was already asleep in their rooms, and there was complete silence. Only one man, however, was awake. His timid footsteps echoed on the soft carpet. It was the princess, and behind her, a servant appeared out of nowhere and said that the prince was asleep. The girl was even a little scared. She looked at the servant with a disgruntled look. "What of it?" The man replied that it would be better if she came by tomorrow, but the girl replied that she had business with him. The servant insisted, and the girl began slowly to boil with anger. She turned to him. Did he dare to be impertinent to her now? She was so energetic that the servant almost fell over. What's that incredible pressure feeling? But the girl also quickly calmed down, snorted, and turned away. She held a large bundle in her hands, looking at the servant. She told him not to even think of talking about what had happened. The man tried to get to his feet. He was still trembling with surprise and fear. He looked at the girl as she left, and still didn't understand anything. At this time, the young prince was sleeping sweetly, although it was early morning outside. Suddenly, the alarm clock sounded, a very pleasant melody. The boy opened his eyes, got out of bed, and looked toward the alarm clock. He hadn't seen it here before. It was a toy. It looked like a wind-up mechanical code. Next to it was a letter in an envelope. The boy picked up the letter, carefully unsealed it, and took out a small piece of paper. The letter said, "I'm sorry I didn't say it this afternoon when I found out you weren't eating. And overloading yourself, I was really worried." As soon as the boy read the letter, a wide smile appeared on his face. "I pass you a musical doll. It will help you relax. I hope it will be to your liking. Don't tell Mom I came by. She told me not to disturb you." It was a letter from his sister. It even had his signature on it. On the back was a note from his mom. She said to tell him if his sister bothered him. Until then, she'd pretend it never happened. The guy sits on his bed, his mom and sister worrying and taking care of him, and he's been just lying in bed for over 10 years. Suddenly, his musings were interrupted by a voice. It said that the food was ready. Iron immediately perked up. It was finally time to eat. He took quick steps toward the living room. Tonight, he would eat with his family. The servant kept pacing back and forth. He couldn't get enough of the fact that the prince had changed. There was a smile on his face. He didn't even know how to react. He had never seen the prince so overflowing with enthusiasm. Iron sat at the table with his family. His sister put another piece of roast meat on his plate. She was incredibly thoughtful this day. It seems yesterday's fight had affected her in a good way. Dad sat at the head of the table. The boy had a strange expression on his face. He was even a little sad at the realization of the situation. In a sad voice, the boy said that he wanted to thank his family for being so concerned about him, even though he just lies in bed all day long. He used to be ashamed to say it, but now he said he loved his family. The mother smiled back. Curlia looked at him with a surprised look. She had never heard such a thing from her brother. His father smiled and said in a warm voice that they loved him too. The boy apologized for causing them so much trouble. The man smiled and told him not to say such a thing. Let them go back to eating now. Then the father turned to his son again. He had something else to say. He said he heard that his son had started practicing with the sword. Practicing is certainly a commendable thing, but let him not overdo it. The boy assured his father that everything was fine. He was not overworking. There was nothing to worry about. The father said it would be better for him to take small breaks. He went back to his workouts, and the guys who were in the gym were wondering, what day is today already? Aaron went back to his training. Even though it was hard, he was still swinging the weapon. It seemed he had been practicing for about a month now. I can't believe the prince has been practicing for so long and doesn't miss a day. Did he really have a brain? The men remembered the old man who had come to see them so recently. He's always sitting here watching the training. He seems to have gotten permission. And what is he looking at here? The old man didn't seem to be paying any attention to them and continued to watch while chewing on a blade of grass. Well, it was already the 10th day of his observation of the prince's training. At first, he thought it was just inferiority and pride. That's why he thought the boy wouldn't last long. In fact, however, his reasoning was wrong. The matter is quite different. The old man had only one question. How could a man who had been lazy his entire life be able to endure such training without a single grudge on his face? The boy trains every day, with the intensity of a blacksmith forging iron, without hesitation, as if he's been living at this pace for decades. Squinting, looking over his entire life, he couldn't recall anyone with that kind of will. There was something, though. Wait a minute. Iron will accumulate years later, gaining experience, but for now, only a boy of 15 before him. If the boy continues to train with the same diligence and gets to a good master, what he will be able to reach the heights. Iron continued swinging his sword. Despite his immense fatigue, the guy worked tirelessly. The old man sat there the whole time, watching without a word. It was as if he was concentrating on the child. Then he looked at the guard and politely said he had something he wanted to ask him. The guard turned around. About the prince who's practicing over there. Doesn't he have a personal teacher? The guard replied that the master of the manor had just recently said that he would soon present a master swordsman to the prince. The old man asked who exactly they wanted to hire as a teacher for the boys. The man scratched his beard and said that the information was not secret and that Orn Zirkin should be the teacher. As soon as the old man heard that name, he was literally skewered. He immediately shouted, "You can't! Such a precious child should not be put in the hands of such a lascivious man who drinks alcohol day in and day out. The boy's got talent. We must hurry before it's too late. We can't put him in the hands of that asshole." The old man turned and walked away. The guard continued to stand and stare after him. The old man was extremely worried. He had to immediately meet the master of the estate and talk to him. He was let in without any problems, and the lord was already waiting for him in the office. He asked in surprise, "Is it true?" The old man stood in front of him and firmly said it was absolutely true. To be honest, the man himself couldn't believe his son had so much potential. Except there was one thing that got in the way of everything. Korno Fencing Academy, the best academy on the entire continent that selects only talented people. They don't look at gender, social status, and the like. It's enough to be an official student, to be treated with more respect, much more than a mere aristocrat. However, the greatness of this academy is commensurate with the difficulty of entry. He beckoned his son to him. The boy stood there, not understanding anything. The father said he would not insist if the boy did not want to. Let him say so at once. The boy stood before him. His father said he was only telling him about one of the paths he had yet to choose. After this conversation, the boy wondered a little if he would succeed. He was tormented by doubts. I mean, he spent 10 years just lying in bed. Who knows if they'll take him there? However, the boy was not going to give up so easily. He clenched his teeth. He doesn't want to stay in the same place. The guy's in his own bed. He's sick of it. For himself, and for his family. He's willing to go above and beyond. After a short consideration, the boy found himself back in his father's office. The man looked at him with surprise. The guy burst into the office and said he was going to the academy. Soon, the carriage was ready. It was time for him to leave, and his family saw him off at the entrance. Everyone wished him luck, almost with glee. There was a sad smile on his father and mother's face, and only his sister looked at him doubtfully. The carriage moved forward. The way was not a short one. There were wide fields all around, and beautiful scenery surrounding them. The servant asked, "This is the boy's first time traveling outside of his estate, right?" Iron replied that it was. The man handed the boy a small, unwrapped package containing some kind of amulet. He said the princess had asked him to give it to him. The boy looked at the jewelry with surprise. A small joy awoke inside him. He smiled warmly and remembered his sister mentally thanking her. Soon they arrived at the academy. As soon as the boy saw the place he was to study, his eyes widened. The academy was truly colossal. There was a huge gate in front of them, through which many students passed. The servant said he would escort him to the entrance. The boy protested, however, and said that he could do it all by himself. The servant was even a little taken aback at this. The boy said in a voice full of confidence that from now on he was an apprentice. He had to get used to acting alone. He smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. He couldn't believe the boy had grown up like that. Iron said goodbye to his friend and moved towards the academy. The servant bowed low and, almost crying, said he wished him brilliant results. The boy moved forward, straight to the gate, where quite a few people were already crowded together. In front of him stood a boy with blue hair and wearing the same blue clothes. He was accompanied by 2 guards. One of them said he was Mr. Brad Lloyd, recommended by a knight named Cole Shady. The guards standing at the gate said they were honored to meet such a gifted descendant of the Lloyd family. A man with red hair and a serious expression stood there. He looked at Irony. The boy held out the letter to him and said that he had been recommended by the traveling knight, Bran Somerville. The guard immediately spread his hands and seductively said that it was a huge part for them to meet him. This knight, they know him well too. The guard continued to smile radiantly. It was the Grand Master who led the raid in the mines for several years. They opened the gate in front of the boy and invited him inside. The boy thanked them for their support and farewell. The guards looked at each other. This old man wrote a letter of recommendation. What's wrong with him? And besides, it's the feckless aristocrat. The boys wondered, who the hell is he anyway? Don't they know? He's a slacker from the Pereira family. The man really didn't know, but judging by his physique, he thought he was the one. How could that promiscuous old man even like him? Iron stepped closer to the front doors and put his hand against them. The cold, coming from the metal doors, pierced through his body. The boy even shuddered a little. He imagined that there would be a lot of people there, and he would be extremely uncomfortable. However, he still went inside, and it was indeed crowded. Everyone immediately turned to look at him. They look at him with such contempt that he became extremely uncomfortable and wanted to leave this place. He'll have to keep his composure though because he came here to study. Self-control, we must not forget. He was still catching scornful looks. Suddenly, the boy saw a familiar face off to the side and immediately looked over there, the same man who had met him at the gates of the academy. He stepped up to the podium and introduced himself. His name was Ahmed, and from now on he would be training and evaluating them. The man took a closer look at the students and began to scrutinize them. There were some pretty promising, interesting individuals among the first year. His gaze fell on the 3 students. Of course, the one that stands out the most is the genius from the Linja family, or Elijah, the girl with the ash-white hair. Suddenly, Lloyd looked at the girl and grimaced. What was she missing? What was she doing here? The boy grimaced. What a devil. Because she's in the academy, his chances of becoming first are getting slimmer and slimmer. Ahmed said they are not students yet, but only pre-med students. The students tensed up. If they can pass 2 tough tests, and after a year, they will also be able to attend this place. They will become real students. The man smiled broadly with his bright smile and said, "Let them leave their things and come out." There is a place he would like to show them. They soon came to a spacious courtyard. The instructor stood in front of them and told them that here they would have physical training sessions where they would develop endurance. Well, it's time to get started. The man stopped. He immediately took off and ran forward like a bullet. This was an endurance test they would have to follow. The other students also got up from their seats and ran after the instructor. However, none of them managed to catch up with him. A man ran far ahead and cheered the students on. Behind them was a column of dust. The students ran as hard as they could. Iron, unaccustomed to such training, was exhausted. Lloyd realized that the run promises to be a long one, so we need to run in the tail and keep track of the situation. He turned back around to see this unlucky aristocrat. Iron was at the very end at this time, not given that nickname for nothing. The boy was barely breathing. He felt like his heart was about to feel like it was going to explode. It was too hard. He just couldn't run anymore. The boy was ready to spit his lungs out today. The instructor was running his second lap. He looked at the boy and sighed disappointedly. Everyone was gradually drifting away from him, and he could no longer escape. But still, he couldn't just give up. The boy got to his feet and kept running. Lloyd looked at him with a surprised look. He had already thought the boy had given up, hadn't he? But no, Iron got up and ran on as best he could. "That's nothing." The instructor stretched out in a wide smile. He had underestimated the boy after all. Iron thought that compared to what the man from his dream had gone through, his training was nothing. He wants to be like him. The boy was panting, but running. His eyes lit up, and for that he must run. He must flee from his old self, the lazy boy. Another instructor stood in the bleachers and watched their run closely. Suddenly, the man squinted and looked even harder. There was something wrong with this boy. He saw the silhouette of one of the students barely moving. Iron ran with the last of his strength and his breath hitched, steam from the boy's exertion. The instructor, along with the rest of the students, had already completed 1 lap and was approaching the boy, who could barely move his legs. The instructor who had been watching this snapped out of his seat and in 1 leap across the distance, picked up the boy. The rest of the students ran through and didn't even notice anything. The man looked at the boy. No, he had fallen. Not from exhaustion. He had drained all the strength he had. Interesting young man. Iron was barely breathing. Steam was coming from his body. The boy was almost unconscious. He lay with his eyes closed and tried to come to his senses. Suddenly, his eyes opened. He thought he was asleep. But no, he woke up in some unfamiliar room. It looked like he was resting. He couldn't understand where he was, but suddenly he heard someone's unfamiliar voice. The boy immediately turned around. A man with his hair in a ponytail stood next to him and said cheerfully that he had nothing to worry about for now. Everything was in perfect order. His name was Lun Tarhal. Iron thanked him in a trembling voice. The man smiled naturally. "Thank you." If it wasn't for him, this boy wouldn't have recovered like this. He leaned over to the kid and said something told him they were going to be seeing a lot of each other. The boy nodded his head. The man handed him a small piece of paper. "What is it?" The man briefly explained to him that this was an interim test, or rather, the results. This run was to at least roughly determine their abilities. The boy looked closely and saw his name at the very end. Out of 400 contestants, he was in 400th place. The doctor sat down beside him and said, "The higher the place, the more joyful the soul. However, the lower the place, the stronger the incentive to try. However, in a year, this ranking will change beyond recognition." The man wanted to say something else, but hesitated half a word. He looked at the boy. This kid didn't look like he needed it. A man picked up the boy and lifted him to his feet. Get up! Get up! You can't skip class on the first day. Soon, the boy found himself in the auditorium. The teacher stood behind the podium and spoke. The man smiled and continued. He introduced himself. His name was Karaka. All students today will follow a clear schedule. According to the schedule, if anything changes, they will let them know. The exact schedule and routine was on the sheet. After 7 p.m., they will have free time. From that day on, they will have access to all street courts, indoor gym, and other places. Iron cheered up. This was good news, so he would be able to pick up a sword today too. The man held up a finger and remarked meaningfully, "Training with weapons is forbidden, and..." At those words, Iron opened his mouth in surprise. Evening came and the boy returned to the gym for a workout. Students slowly crept toward the campus gym. 2 of his henchmen were walking beside Lloyd. One of them asked, "Didn't they find the usual classes too boring?" 2 guys started arguing amongst themselves, while Lloyd just walked on to the gym. When they went in there, their eyes went wide with amazement. It was really spacious and had quite a lot of equipment for training. There were a bunch of people there working out their muscle mass. Someone lifted dumbbells, someone lifted kettlebells, someone worked out with a barbell. Suddenly, Lloyd saw something strange that made him stop. The bar was going up and down. It was heavy. Who was lifting it? There was a girl with ashy white hair standing there. She was practicing so fast, you didn't have time to keep track of her. It was Elijah, a girl lifting a heavy barbell without much effort. The boy took a closer look and realized that the rumors that had been spread about her were the opposite of shrinking. The other students are no match for her. Standing next to her, the boy felt inferior. Where did she get that build? Lloyd had heard she was a year younger than him. The boys shifted their gaze to the side and saw that Iron was also practicing sports. Even he seemed to be disciplined. The guys laughed. And really, even in the last test, he was chomping at the bit. People do change after all. Still, it looked ridiculous. Iron was lifting a small barbell and pushing hard. Look at him, Mama. I think he's about to pass out again. Elijah looked away from the class and looked toward the boy. Lloyd said they shouldn't waste time on this and need to go about their business. Suddenly, the sound of panting reached his ear, and he shifted his gaze to the side. There was another girl working out there. She was lugging dumbbells hard. It's a commoner named Judith. She pushed him off the second step. Despite all that, however, she's terribly assertive. He won't let his seat be stolen from him again. The boy came closer and closer to her and began to crunch his knuckles in anger. Suddenly, the girl turned around. Stop staring. She seemed to be in a bad mood. The boy was even a little frightened at this suddenness and lost all his ardor. It was as if he'd been hit on the head. The girl once more repeated, "Yes, she is the one addressing him. She's looking him in the eye right now. Let him get the hell out of here." As soon as this girl said this, his sycophants jumped up to her and began. The girl pushed them away and said with disgust that his breath stinks. Are you sure they ate the same food? However, the girl got distracted and told them to shut up for a second. She looked away, and Lloyd did the same. There was a look of surprise on the boy's face. He didn't understand at first what was going on, but then his eyes widened. They both looked away in amazement. There was definitely something going on there. Elijah approached Iron and delicately apologized and asked to hear her out. The girl looked at him with her blue eyes. She seemed to be quite benevolent. The boy distracted from his studies and looked at the girl with a surprised look. Judith looked up from there in surprise too. What the hell is going on there? What the hell is she talking to him for? The girl was standing across from him, and they were talking about something. I think she was trying to explain something to him. The boy listened intently and wondered. Everyone else looked at them in surprise too. Someone even hesitated and poured water on another's head. Then the girl stepped aside and Iron continued with the class. He stared at her in surprise for a few more seconds. The girl opened the door and walked briskly out of the gym. Everyone kept looking at her. Then she slammed the door so loudly that everyone got goosebumps. Iron stared after her with a slightly puzzled look. What had she said to him? He noticed someone's gaze on him and shifted his eyes to the side. Absolutely everyone in the audience looked at him with rage. It even made me feel a little uncomfortable. Not a word was heard. Lloyd and Judith looked at him with glances as if they wanted to tear him apart. Suddenly, the girl stood up and walked straight toward him. The boy who was sitting next to her started to say something, but quickly shut up. Iron continued to lift the barbell now that he was able to do so quite easily. Judith approached him and addressed him rudely. The girl was clearly hostile. He looked at her with a surprised look and even a little startled. The girl continued, "Is he ignoring her? Answer, what's your name?" The guy immediately got up and started apologizing. He asked what she wanted. The girl rudely replied that she didn't need anything. Let her lay it out briskly. Iron looked at her with incomprehension. What did he have to say? Elijah Linjay, what were they talking about? Judith came close to him. After what the boy told her, the girl seemed upset. What? Iron said she was just explaining to him how to hold the barbell correctly, that's all. And he didn't seem to believe her, but he wasn't lying. Judith asked, had they known each other before? Had they met? Iron replied in a shaky voice that it was nothing like that. Eventually, she got bored of it and turned away, telling him one last time to make a simpler face. Okay, thoughts out of the way. Time to get on with it. The boy picked up the barbell again and started lifting. He decided to try the right thing. However, suddenly someone called out to him again. It was Lloyd this time. He too was curious about what they were talking about. Besides, he wondered, what was he talking to that red-haired girl about? A month later, Lloyd drank water greedily. The training had been quite diligent. They've had the same routine for a whole month. It's getting annoying. The boy did not listen to them, but only shifted his disgruntled gaze to the side. Iron was still lifting the barbell, but he was doing it differently. Ilya kept telling him, standing beside him, "Don't arch your back. Breathe evenly." The boy tried to follow all her orders. Lloyd had had enough of all this, realized he didn't need to pay attention to those two, and continued his training. In fact, he will never surpass her name, and will take the top spot in the rankings this time around. And this kid, Iron, he's exactly the opposite, however he gets out of here. Is a guy who's never tried a tryout in his life going to be able to beat him by suddenly deciding to go out of his way to train? He's going to get sick of this, and he's going to go back to his old self. Lloyd told everyone else to follow him to the stadium. His goal was first place. The boy walked forward with a confident step, walking to the stadium. He saw Judith practicing there. The girl was literally out of her mind. It's very tough, every day before they get here and train all day long. Lloyd didn't listen to his friends interjecting. He gritted his teeth in annoyance. He got on the treadmill and ordered the others to run too. They didn't even expect this. The guy didn't even turn to them and said that they could run behind if they were tired, but if they were capable of more. He held his breath. Let them squeeze every last drop of strength out of their bodies and let them catch up with him. It's been 3 months since we started training. Instructors have been standing in front of students who have been practicing hard. Ahmed and his companions stood and watched. He said that he knew that a lot of people were already exhausted. Karaka was standing next to him and said that this year, however, there were still some good shots. Their outstanding trinity still adheres to self-discipline. They're practicing hard. Even though they're tired, they have a great future. Still not considered one of the best for nothing. Karaka then shifted his gaze to Iron. No, you can't call this guy a careless student anymore. Thinking about it, the man smiled. This academy can change people after all. The boy had matured and now looked more like a fighter. He trained with the same zeal after all. The students found themselves in the classrooms. The instructor stood in front of them and said he had an announcement for them. Soon it would be time for the midterm assessment to begin. The students are holding their breath. The teacher clapped his hands loudly, calling everyone to silence. Ahmed showed them a sheet with a route they had to run. All they had to do was run it in a certain time. There were whispers in the stands. It's unreal. The man continued. He said they had been learning to swim from them for 4 months. It'll be a cakewalk for them. The grading system is simple. It doesn't matter what place you get. It's all about timing. And also, the first 5 who are the first to cross the finish line will be personally awarded by the head of the academy. How's that for motivation? The exam will take place in 10 days at 10 a.m. So to speak, the sign man yelled. Until then, classes will be canceled. They can use that time at their discretion. He wished them luck. Lovett and his friends went outside. They started hanging around him and were constantly fawning over him. But the boy did not pay any attention to them and thought about his rivals. He realized that he would never reach the first place. However, nothing would prevent him from getting into the top 5. However, he didn't understand one thing. The boy shifted his eyes to the side. Why does his attention keep shifting to that guy? Iron continued to train like a beast. The next day, training continued with the same diligence. Judith lifted the barbell with fierceness. The girl didn't seem to know what fatigue was at all. Today, she set a new personal record. We could call it a day. Suddenly, a strange sound reached her, as if someone was spitting out their stomach. The girl looked that way in disgust. That kid again? Yes, Iron was on his knees trying to regain consciousness. He was breathing hard and seemed ready to pass out. Despite all this, however, his physical abilities have increased greatly from what they were when he entered. The boy picked up the barbell again and began to carry it. How can he only squeeze it out of him? The girl wrung her hands in her fists. Is her will any weaker than the feckless aristocrats? Hell no! She grasped the barbell again and began to lift it even harder. Ahmed and Karaka watched it all from the sidelines. Karaka asked his colleague how many he thought would pass today. The man replied that there were probably 30 people. Suddenly, there was a supervisor who smilingly said that they seemed to be very generous with praise. The instructor even got a little scared. The leader's name was John, and he said that he decided not to repeat last year's mistakes and wanted to see everything with his own eyes. Karaka shook hands with the leader and said it was an honor to meet him. The supervisor approached him and asked him how old he looked. The man even got a little scared and said that he was about 55. The supervisor laughed and was surprised. He can't stand open subservience. Let him wait for a double salary. The man smiled. In fact, the manager was 90 years old. John smiled and said, "The atmosphere is not at all the same as last year. Could this be the result of good teaching?" Suddenly, the executive took a closer look and dunked. They looked at Elijah. This was the second nugget of the Ingja sword family. She was unspeakably intelligent and talented, as befitting a member of her family. The leader sighed sympathetically. Poor girl, she should have chosen her own path rather than follow the family creed. Then they turned their heads toward Judith. She continued to study hard. The supervisor asked if they tried to stop her. She's obviously overloading herself. But the instructor said it was useless. The manager said that we should slow her down a bit. It would be a shame to lose such talent. He walked up to the girl and started talking to her about something. The instructors were whispering among themselves. When the leader stepped away from her, the girl immediately started her exercises all over again. She didn't even seem to be listening to him. Ahmed asked, "Didn't she listen to him?" The old man grinned. What a stubborn child. The old man asked, "Where's Iron?" It was very interesting to see what was wrong with that boy now. The instructors looked around the gymnasium. There were exercise equipment, but nothing else. Then they found the kid, standing like that for 30 minutes. The men looked at each other. Iron stood with the barbell in his hands the whole time. He held it without letting it go for a second. The old man looked at him and moved a couple of steps forward. He said in a calm voice for the others to leave him alone. The instructors wondered, "How come? Why?" The old man looked at them and told them not to touch him until he surrendered. In young men, the mind now dominates the body. Indeed, the boy practiced hard and paid no attention to anything. Soon he finished his training and went to his room. The guy was lying on the bed and resting. His body was burning from overexertion. A lot of unusual things had happened in the last few days. He hadn't even expected such changes from himself. Guys who have been ignoring him and trying to avoid him all this time are now paying attention to him. The big question remained, why is Elijah helping him? She's not the type to do anything out of sympathy, but these thoughts were getting to him. No more thinking. It's time to rest. He found himself in a warm bed. Big red velvet reminded him of a place. He remembered this place. The boy had not left his bed to stay in this place. A woman with a white face was looking at him. He was literally drowning in the soft bed, his mind beginning to cloud over. It wasn't his mom's hug, but it was still very warm. A little rest would be very welcome. He snuggled into the bed and drifted into sleep. He woke up and felt someone hugging him. It felt good, a familiar feeling from his childhood. However, suddenly, he felt someone's huge sword chopping the space into small pieces. The boy looked fearfully in front of him. The same man he had seen in his dreams was standing there. The woman held him with her soft, fake hand, not letting him go any further, as if unwilling to let go. The boy looked at her and froze for a while. He hesitated. He touched the fake soft hand and still made his decision. He thanked her for everything, for the time he'd spent with her in his room. Now, he has to go. They would probably never see each other again. The boy moved forward into the future. Soon, the boy woke up. He felt as if the fetters that had hitherto prevented him from having a normal existence had fallen from him. Now firmly on his feet, he felt more alive than ever before. He walked forward with a firm step. Training will not fulfill itself. The boy paid no attention to anyone. Everyone looked at him in surprise. What was wrong with his clothes? Had he been up all night? Lloyd looked at him and said nothing, but his henchman started rambling. The type was pissing him off. Judith had been overworking herself for the last few days, and her condition was not to be envied. The girl was obviously overworked. The boy smiled. If he kept his guard up, second place would be in his pocket. It's okay. Iron kept walking forward, the boys too moving their feet. Elijah looked at him with some sympathy. She noticed that something was wrong with him. Ahmed stood in front of them and spoke loudly. So it's 8:55 on the clock, and he's going to explain the rules of midterm grading one more time. The route consists of 4 stages. He again showed them a diagram of the route they had to run. There is an instructor on each one. It will be repeated. It is only important to meet the time limit for grading, so let's get them ready. The boys prepared all their strength. Let's go. Everybody move forward. The first stage of the barbell bench press. Elijah grasped it, started to lift it up very quickly. Lloyd looked at her and told himself that even if he put all his energy into it, he couldn't keep up with her. Anyway, it was either him or her. But suddenly, one of his friends looked forward in surprise. Lloyd looked there too, and what he saw made his eyes widen. The guy couldn't believe what he was watching. It just couldn't be that bad. Someone was lifting the barbell with such force that my eyes couldn't keep up. It was crazy. Karaka. Watching it all from the sidelines, he wrote down his worksheet. Iron tried his best. He was unrecognizable. It was as if the boy was uninhabited. Lloyd looked at him and gritted his teeth. What a jerk. Was he planning on falling off his feet at the start? Elijah passed him at this time and headed for the second stage. It was so damn fast. The boy couldn't believe it. He was specifically out of time. The instructor announced that Iron passed the first stage. Lloyd looked in his direction and tensed. This wasn't funny anymore. Iron was breathing like a raging bull, steam coming off his body. The guy had literally pushed himself to the limit. How did this happen? Everyone was puzzled. The next stage was jumping on the box. The boy did it without a problem. Okay, let them laugh. He understands their confusion. Even he is shocked at himself. The guy went through it stage by stage with ease. For him, there's not even a thought of fatigue, so he's doing everything at his own pace. The guy landed on the ground. His eyes widened and strength rushed to his body. He felt the second breath. He swung over another box and rushed forward. We need to move faster. Ahmed looked at him in surprise. Wow, the second stage has been passed too. Lloyd looked in his direction. The guy was still on the first stage. Yes, it was just unthinkable. He felt some pressure from the side and shifted his gaze there. There stood Judith, lifting a heavy barbell as fast as if it were a child's toy. The academy founder looked at all this with a smile. He was glad that this year's students were much more capable. Iron was already on his third leg, a long-distance run. He was in second place, Elijah was running ahead, the boy couldn't keep up with her. He equalized his breathing, and this running was no trouble to him. He ran at his own pace. He didn't know what was happening to him. His whole body felt like it had taken on a new shape. The boy ran as if he were flying. What a wonderful feeling he has. He rubbed his head to recover. Steam was coming out of his mouth, his body on edge. He could see his rival's back in front of him, and all he wanted to do was get her out of his way. He felt someone approaching him. They were very fast and rumbling footsteps. The boy turned around to see what kind of steam locomotive was running beside him. Suddenly, something whizzed past them. The guys didn't even have time to notice what it was, but it was moving so fast that it overtook all the others. They were even speechless for a second. It was impossible to get to such a point. It was Judith, of course. The girl was pushing herself to the limit. She swore to herself that she would take the first place by all means. The girl ran as hard as she could. Her body was at its limit. Iron was shocked. The boy hadn't expected her to be able to improve her physical stats that much. He even slowed his pace down a bit to take a closer look. The girl at that time was running as fast as she could. She had only one phrase in her head: "I'll never lose." There was no way she was going to give in. No, she didn't even run. She flew, pushing off the ground. Then she started doing push-ups. With all her might, she practiced without sparing herself, just to prove to everyone that she was here for a reason. Absolutely everyone in her childhood mocked her. They didn't believe in her. They thought she was a commoner who couldn't do anything. At that time, she developed a hatred for everyone and a desire to prove herself. Everyone thought she was special, so they kept bullying her. She forgets what reality is, and she crosses the line where it doesn't belong. All these words were swirling around in her head. The girl came even more furious from them and continued to work with redoubled vigor. She works her ass off to prove herself to everyone, and no one can say she's not worthy. She'll never give in to anyone. The girl clenched her teeth with anger and rage and rushed towards the next challenge. She not only had no right to back down now, she would not lose to anyone else. She wouldn't let anyone beat her. Judith jumped into the river without even thinking. She didn't care about the cold water. It was the fourth stage, a long-distance swim. The girl swam as if she had lived her whole life only in water. Her speed was staggering. Although she was breathing hard and exhausted, she didn't care at all. She swam like a madwoman. The water lapped at her eyes, but she didn't care. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her leg. It was hard to electrocute her. The girl even lost consciousness for a second. Her leg began to ache from the exertion. It was cramped. Now the girl had lost her pace. Her muscles tightened, and she couldn't swim any further. But why now? The girl was furious. There was no way she was going to lose. She clenched her teeth against the pain and continued swimming. Suddenly, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. Her eyes widened and her breath hitched. Elijah overtook her as if nothing had happened. The girl swam so fast and easy without the slightest hitch. Judith thought she would never win. For a second, she thought it was all over. All right, she's in over her head. Now she can't win. Elijah was swimming so fast it was almost impossible to keep up with her. But even so, could she not succeed? Judith tensed her body again and tried to swim on, but the pain kept her from moving a meter forward. Elijah. Everything was getting farther and farther away from her. Her silhouette was already starting to dissolve. Keeping up with her now was almost impossible. The gap was too big. At that moment, Judith was struck with a great resentment in her heart. She had worked so hard. She had wanted to win, and now the victory was slipping right out of her hands, and she would remain forever an outsider. The girl began to cry. It was getting hard in her chest. It was almost impossible to breathe. The girl lost strength with every second. She could no longer hold on to the water, and slowly swam to the bottom, wanting to just rest. She didn't care about anything anymore. However, she was picked up by someone's strong arms and pulled out of the water with one powerful jerk. She was still unconscious. The girl started coughing, spitting up water. It was Iron. He saw her start to drown, and he grabbed her, dragging her with him. The boy was at his limit himself, but he was still saving the girl. Her eyes slowly began to open. For a few seconds, she still didn't realize what was happening or who was dragging her. Her body was practically motionless. Force, the boy shoveled out and tried to swim to shore so I could let her drown. Judith began to cough loudly as the water filled her lungs, and it was hard for her to breathe. The girl began to twitch, but Iron held her firmly and dragged her to the shore. In a weakened voice, she asked what he was doing. The guy looked at her and didn't understand anything as her voice was too quiet. She started to say something, but it was almost impossible to understand. The girl quietly said that he pissed her off, and the boy, in the meantime, continued to swim towards the shore, which was only a few meters away. Judith was trying to come to her senses. She was coughing up water, and Iron was standing beside her trying to catch his breath. His lungs were literally burning from overexertion. Karaka's instructor was already running towards them. The man looked very scared. Iron turned to her and asked, "Is she all right?" The man yelled to leave her to him and let him run quickly. The boy nodded obediently and followed the others. He had already fallen behind, and now he would have to catch up with the other points. He stood in a daze for a few more seconds when the instructor shouted for him to move faster. The boy immediately ran back. Now, he was almost in last position. Judith looked after him, her eyes barely open. She had a strange feeling in her head. Why did he even save her? What had just happened? With blurry eyes, she saw the guy continue to jump into the water. He had gotten her all the way to the beginning after all. Now Aaron ran after the others. What an asshole. That was the last thing the girl thought about, as long as her consciousness was still with her. Her eyes slowly began to close. One of the competitors was on his knees. He seemed to have lost. Water was dripping off him. Not everyone would be able to cover such a distance after all. The boy seemed to be crying. There were a great many who had failed today. He whimpered. He was very disappointed that he had failed in such a worthless way. But basically, it was predictable. Suddenly, the instructor came up to him and in a cheerful voice told him that it was too early to lose heart. Everything could still be corrected. The boy looked at him in surprise. Karaka stood beside him, and with his hands resting on Boca, he said with a smile in his eyes that he still had a second evaluation waiting for him. Compared to the first, his passing criteria was much more lenient. If he kept his hands up, he would definitely pass. Boy! This cheered him up, and he rushed off after the others. That's great. If that was the case, he would definitely try his best. The boy was on his seventh and happy again. Ahmed approached his colleague and smiled and said that he expected nothing less from this year's students. They would pass much more than last year. Karaka laughed and said that indeed, today was different. There was a lot of talent, but one person in particular stood out. This was not expected from him. It seemed to be the first time such a thing had happened at the final evaluation. The main protagonist of today's event placed 34th out of 35 by Iron Pereira. The instructors seemed to be a bit shocked by this antics as well. The other students looked at the boy with disdain. What a shabby thing to do. Why would you do such a thing? You wanted to show you were good? Well, now he's going to lose. Thanks to this kid, someone got 5th place. The others immediately ran up to this arrogant boy and started asking him how he managed to take the 5th place. At times like this, congratulations are in order. The boy was indignant. Why did they doubt him? The boy's name was Lance. Lloyd ran over to him and congratulated him with a smile on his face. Lance looked at him and smilingly thanked him, pleased that his supervisor had noticed his efforts so much. Lance pressed his hand to his chest and said he couldn't have done it without Lloyd. The boy wondered, did he do anything? Lance did it all by himself. Then, Lloyd was congratulated on his second place, but the boy was extremely dissatisfied with his result. He had not managed to overtake this girl. Now, he has a grudge lurking in his heart. He is always in second place, and someone overtakes him. However, he still couldn't get Iron out of his mind. With the current abilities he had shown in the performance, Lloyd couldn't keep up. Fear settled in his heart. It seemed he had a new, serious opponent. He admitted that if Judith had distributed her forces properly, Lloyd would have come fourth. The boy frowned. This competition was harder than he'd thought, but on the other hand, he still had a chance, so it was too early to give up. He had been staring at Aaron the whole time. The boy was already starting to get really nervous. It was turning into some kind of paranoia. He'd gotten his head bashed in. He admitted it. Well, okay, it wasn't over yet. The next day, Iron was still practicing the same way. The guy's perseverance was something to be envied. He ran another cross-country race to improve his breathing ability. He was finally exhausted and crouched down to rest a bit. His breathing was labored. The boy was panting heavily, but he never stopped practicing. Suddenly, a stern female voice came to him. The boy looked away in surprise. Why did you do that? The first question he heard. Elijah was approaching him, and it seemed the girl was extremely displeased about something. She was walking towards him like she wanted to fight him. The boy even had goosebumps running down his spine. However, he didn't understand what she was talking about at first, so he asked again. What is she talking about? He sincerely did not understand what the claim was. The girl wasn't going to back down. She said Iron knew exactly what she was talking about, didn't she? The look on her face made it clear there was going to be a scandal. Iron stood up and looked at her with a guilty look. He really didn't want to get into a relationship right now when he was practicing. What did she want anyway? I think he was starting to realize what he was talking about. Was this about saving Judith? The girl nodded, her face completely serious. She looked like a mother or older sister, scolding a child for a bad deed. Why the hell would you do that? The girl was almost on the verge of rage. Iron looked at her with a surprised look and remained silent. He tried to gather his thoughts. How do I answer that question? He wanted to say something and even began to speak, but his voice was uncertain. They stood opposite each other, staring at each other with searing glances. It just seemed to him that he had no other choice. He said it so simply and straightforwardly, as if it were a matter of course. The guy still didn't seem to realize what he'd done, but did it automatically. The girl wasn't going to give up so easily. She approached him and in an assertive voice asked him if he could hear the nonsense he was saying. The instructor would have helped her. There was no need to interfere. For such a stupid reason, he didn't give a damn about the award of the head of the academy, which is considered the best in the entire continent, right? Also, he spit on the chance to strike back at everyone for his humiliation, to show everyone who bullied him and looked down on him he's just gonna let it go. That's crazy. The girl just couldn't believe what was happening. Iron stood in front of her with his hands down. He didn't want to say anything since he thought this conversation was pointless, but if it happened. Now it was his turn to speak. He asked the girl if she knew why he was called the feckless aristocrat. She looked at him in surprise, for she had not expected him to answer her at all. The boy began his story. A lump even came to his throat. In the past, he had felt as if he had been in a swamp for a long time. There was a lot to justify it, but still, it was akin to being asleep forever. He even tried to get out. After all, there was someone waiting for him there all the time. He was constantly being helped, even though the boy was completely helpless in this situation. After all, he always had help. Someone always held his hand and pulled him out of the abyss, at the very last moment when he was desperate and ready to drown. He didn't believe anyone could help him and just continued to resign himself to his life, the life of an amoeba. But at the last minute, it was always his beloved family that pulled him out. She was always there for him. She was always there for him. She never once left him alone with his problems. Thanks to the help of a couple of people, he managed to get out of that abyss and onto the surface. So he couldn't just pass by seeing Judith. The guy meant it. That's the whole reason. Nothing more. He said it so simply, smiling, as if it were a common thing for him. The boy was so good-natured and simple-minded that it was even endearing for a second. However, the girl did not share his enthusiasm. She still had the same stern gaze, as if the teacher was looking at him. She was silent for a few seconds, pondering what to say to him. Finally, she turned around and asked, "He was telling me that he only picked up a sword last year, right?" Iron nodded. Yes, he had. But where was she going with this? The boy didn't understand anything. The girl frowned again, and her voice became even more stern. She seemed ready to tear it up. Sword arts and physical training are different things. Talent and diligence are necessary in both, but in the mastery of sword arts, talent plays an extremely important role. Perhaps because of his antics yesterday, he had missed the chance to be instructed personally by the leader himself. The girl was almost screaming. The boy looked at her with an uncomprehending look. The girl continued and said that she would not help him anymore, and if suddenly he would go down because of the ridicule of others, she wished him not to regret his choice. Those were the last words she intended to say to him. Iron wanted to say something to her, however, she didn't listen to him at all, and just continued walking in the opposite direction with a quick step. The boy asked one last time, then why was it even necessary to help him? Ilya stopped for a second, and her eyes widened. The girl hesitated. This question stumped her for some time. She thought about it, searching for an answer, but she couldn't formulate one. Her voice shook as she began to speak. She said she hates it when people talk about things they don't know. She continued walking in the opposite direction. Iron stood in the same pose, watching her. This conversation puzzled him, and he sincerely did not understand why the girl had treated his seemingly good deed as if he had saved a man, and now she was talking to him as if he had done something very bad. In any case, it had to be dealt with. Soon, all the students were gathered in the common room to announce the results of the midterm assessment. Teachers stood on the bleachers and spoke loudly. In front of them stood a string of students. The first exam was passed by 35 people, the second by 78, totaling 113. The 5 students who performed the best on the first exam will be given awards after a personal conversation with the head of the academy. The top 5 students, including Elijah and Lloyd, stood straight and proudly looked forward. However, the leader turned to the instructor and said that he had forgotten something. Ahmed remembered something and almost flicked himself in the mouth. Then, he said in the same loud voice that they were asking student number 311, Iron Pereira, to come up to the podium. The boy was dumbfounded by this. He didn't expect to be called up at the gala. He was almost in last place. Elijah and Lloyd were also surprised. They didn't expect this kid to be noticed at all. But still, they stood their ground. Rivalry is a busy thing. The leader began to speak in a nice, soft voice. The old man seemed pleased. He stood behind the podium, and with a wide, bright smile, he continued to speak. When you go out of your way to catch up with a rival who is surging ahead and not be overtaken by the subject who is running behind you, you can demonstrate stunning abilities that you don't expect of yourself. But if you focus too much on the outcome, you risk missing something important, something that makes us human. The man kept talking as if he were giving a lecture. Iron wasn't like that. The man smiled even wider and said in a good-natured voice, in a situation where an accidental mistake could have sent him straight to hell, he sacrificed his time and saved a drowning comrade. Iron stood on the podium, and all eyes were on him at the moment. There could be many opinions about what had happened, but the leader and all the instructors agreed that what he had done was worthwhile. So, they asked him to come up to their stands. All the instructors, with wide smiles on their lips, began to applaud. People were delighted with the boy's act. Judith, who was in the front row, looked at her savior with a smile. There was no trace of the cocky girl who bullied everyone. It seemed to have affected her quite a bit. And now, she seemed to have changed. Iron walked up to the podium where the top student stood. The boy blushed with embarrassment. Another student stood next to him and looked at him with a sidelong glance. Lance didn't seem to be happy at all. Soon, Lloyd was sitting in the supervisor's office. The guy looked a little confused. Oh yeah. Now he realized that he'd been thinking too narrowly before. The kid sat in the chair, and he looked at the supervisor intently. John looked at him and said that there was no need to humiliate yourself like that. A man of narrow-mindedness could not admit his weaknesses. Floyd replied that he was arrogant and stubborn, sticking only to his methods. As his supervisor advised him, from now on, if he met someone he could learn something from, he would not miss the opportunity. Then he stood up, and bowing courteously, asked for permission to bow. The leader continued to look at him kindly. The old man thought that this young man was very talented, clearly aware of his position, and shows a willingness to overcome his own shortcomings. In addition, he has excellent leadership skills. In the future, If he puts in enough effort, he can become a very important person. This guy is clearly aware of his place in society, and he's also very talented. Not without the arrogance of high aristocrats, of course, but not too bad. To start worrying. The old man smirked as he scratched his beard. However, unfortunately, this year they had a lot of capable students arriving in his office. Now sat Elijah. The girl folded her hands in her lap and listened attentively to the leader with incredible respect. The girl looked at him seriously and said that, as a reward, she would like to spar with him. She didn't seem to doubt her request at all. The old man smiled and said good-naturedly that it was a reasonable choice. In principle, he expected such a thing from a girl who showed such results. He smiled and squinted at her and said he would give her some advice, that she should not let anyone control her life, but let her make her own choices and be responsible for them. The old man clearly recognized the problem that every student had. She opened her eyes in surprise and looked at the old man. It seemed the girl had not expected to hear such a thing. Let her not waste her time here, attachment for the sake of attachment. Let her go back home and study the family techniques. It would be much more useful for her. The girl was very much surprised. She repeated her request. She is only asking to spar with him. The old man laughed and said with his eyes closed that it was silly to expect a different reaction. In fact, he didn't. He smiled and said that he had a rather spacious office. Would she be willing to fight here? The girl bowed and thanked him. The sparring began. They were practically on the same level. At the end of the day, the old man was tired, he sighed heavily, and happily thought that this was finally the last student. It was very difficult to please absolutely everyone. There were quite a lot of capable students who passed through his office, and each of them had some kind of peculiar request. Now, in his office, Iron was the last one standing. The old man, sitting in his chair, asked if he wanted something as a reward, even if it wasn't tangible. Let him just say so. The boy stood there, not knowing what to say to him. The old man squinted, honestly. He was more interested in this kid's answer than anything else. He wanted to know what he would demand. Iron looked at him with great respect, and a little confused he began to speak. His voice trembled, but he still said that he would like to make peace with one person, and how would he go about it? His coma-negative skills still left a lot to be desired. The boy emptied his head, and a little sullenly continued. He knew it sounded absurd, but he had no one else to ask for advice. He apologized, barely moving his lips. The boy was very ashamed of his request. It seemed to him that it was just nonsense. The old man smiled and good-naturedly said that the boy, there is nothing to apologize for. It's a perfectly normal request. Let him not worry and thank him for his sincerity. Iron, until he was 15, never left his room. It's understandable. The boy stood in front of him, looking down with his eyes in utter confusion. It's no wonder why he's so confused when he's among his peers. He doesn't seem to know how to interact with people at all. Well, that's easy to fix. It turns out that someone had gotten close to this child whom everyone was making fun of. The old man looked at the boy good-naturedly. All right, let him tell him what happened. It was a request that pleased him. The old man talked to the boy, and throughout the conversation it felt like it was a grandfather talking to his grandson. In the end, Iron thanked the teacher. He had helped him a lot. The old man smiled and said that if that was the case, he was very glad. He hadn't had the chance to give advice that didn't involve swordsmanship or anything like that in a long time. The old man reflected. The fact that the boy wanted to make up with Elijah was quite an unexpected turn. More and more amazing things were happening this year. The old man smirked. It seemed that today's students would bring them more new experiences than the others. He slammed his hands on the table and said that if they dealt with that, now it was time to get to the main thing. Iron marveled. The main thing? So there's more to it? The old man looked at him and quietly said that he wouldn't count just a little advice as a reward. Let him ask for something else. The boy was even a little embarrassed. He had been incredibly embarrassed the whole time. The old man let him be specific. He would like to give him instruction regarding training. In that case, he is more competent in this matter, so let him say what he wants. The boy, still sitting on the chair in front of the old man, apologized again, but nothing came to his mind, no matter how hard he tried. So far, his mind was occupied with the quarrel with the girl, and he had forgotten to think about fencing. He confessed that, in truth, he had only practiced fencing for a month before entering the academy, and on his own. The old man scratched his beard and smiled. Therefore, although it is awkward for him to admit it, he doesn't understand what he wants to learn and what question he should ask. The old man opened his mouth and began to speak, but the boy did not seem to be listening at all. He was completely overwhelmed with despair and embarrassment. It was the first time he had ever spoken to someone of such high rank as an equal. Poor kid kept gibbering and looking at his feet. He was apologizing the whole time, everyone just saying how awesome it was to get a personal lesson from the leader. And now, he had nothing at all to ask him. The boy didn't stop for a second. He apologized to Zato for not being able to take advantage of such a great opportunity, but the boy had no time to finish. The old man approached him and clapped his hands loudly in front of his nose. The boy was startled and twitched. The old man laughed and asked, "Why does he keep apologizing? There's no reason to do that. A good swordsman should be confident." The old man stood in front of him, and only now did the boy see how majestic he was. The old man asked, "Does he agree with him?" Iron timidly answered yes, and nodded his head. He still couldn't believe that he was in the presence of such a high-ranking person. The supervisor walked up to him and patted him on the shoulder. Okay, the boy can take advantage of his offer. Next time, if he feels something is missing, let him come to him boldly, or he can give him a lesson himself when he calculates what he needs. The old man turned his back to him and walked over to the closet. He asked the boy if he had any objection. The boy turned to him and shook his head. No, he thanked the old man and gave him a bow. Good, then he could be free to go. Iron left the office of the head. This conversation affected him in an extraordinary way. The guy couldn't gather his thoughts. He was very embarrassed in front of everyone for taking such an awkward opportunity. However, there was nothing to do. The old man went to the window and continued to watch the boy from afar. He seemed a very unusual student indeed. He had never met anyone like him before. It was worth taking a closer look at him. However, there was something fundamentally wrong with him. The old man frowned. There was not a single bit of anxiety or worry about his ignorance of the sword art. On the contrary, it felt as if he already had a clear goal in mind. Okay, he's keeping an eye on this boy. The supervisor thought that this boy seemed to be guided by someone. Someone is guiding him forward and helping him overcome an obstacle, which is why he is growing so fast. Come to think of it, John had met someone like this before. The old man continued to stare out the window. Talent and confidence in his own abilities was the first thing that caught his eye. It reminded him a lot of him. Plus, this boy had a completely unpredictable personality. You couldn't predict what he would do in the next second, and that seemed to be his forte. But the old man shook his head. No, these people he thought were complete opposites. The old man continued to follow the boy until he disappeared around the next corner. Iron immediately went to the gym to continue his training. It didn't matter to him at all what was happening. He was firmly committed to his goal. The boy did push-ups without sparing himself. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice. Judith looked up at him, approaching completely unnoticed. Wow. She had of course assumed he was practicing again, but she was still surprised. Fencing lessons start from tomorrow. From now on, they will only train with weapons. Iron rose to his feet and immediately asked the question head-on. Why had she come? Judith was embarrassed and began scratching the back of her head. She didn't know what to say and kept saying things she didn't understand. There was something she wanted to say. In the end, the girl still found the right word, although she had a lot of trouble finding it. Thank you. The boy didn't even understand at first, but then he figured it out quickly. I see. The girl approached him and looked him straight in the eye. She said with certainty that she would repay her debt without a doubt. Iron looked at her with a slightly frightened look, but he didn't even think about it. It was as if Judith ignored his words. Well, in short, the girl suggested that he should start getting along. She looked at him so directly, as if they were already friends. The girl held out her hand to him. Iron was even a little frightened by this pressure. His eyes widened, and his heart began to beat a little faster. What? Judith was getting annoyed. What do you mean, what? She says, let's be friends. He's always eaten alone. Now we'll eat together. Aaron didn't even realize it at first, so he's alone. And her, and they'll be practicing sword training together too, isn't that cool? She hit him on the shoulder, and it was supposed to be a friendly punch, but it felt like he was being beaten. The boy even grimaced. Without waiting for an answer, Judith looked at him with that look that murderers usually look at their victim, and Iron got a chill down his spine and hurriedly replied that it was a super idea. His voice shook with fear. Judith calmed down, and joyfully raising her hand in the air, said she would go and would not distract him henceforth. Let him consider her his big sister. The girl waved goodbye to him. Iron continued to stare at her in confusion, but she was 3 years younger than him. He still kept looking at her and rubbing his bruised spot. But whatever, he was glad he'd managed to make another friend in this place. Soon, they went to practice. Judith was beside him. asking if he had heard the song "Turtle, Turtle, 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 pull out your sword, or else I'll roast and eat it." Iron shook his head no, he hadn't heard anything. It was the ancient Korean song, A Turtle's Song, from the work of Mrs. Suro. Everyone else looked at the two of them in surprise. Lloyd was completely confused. Had she changed? Does it seem strange to him? His comrade looked at all of this with amazement. The others didn't miss the opportunity to mock them. "I think that girl hit her head. I got goosebumps." She was still pestering Iron about the fucking song, but the boy was shaking his head and insisting that he didn't know. Lloyd continued to watch them closely. Something else seemed strange to him here. The boy squinted and continued his observations. He also noticed that Iron and Elijah had grown distant from each other. Had something happened between them? Indeed, if you watched them from afar, they didn't even want to look at each other. What is it? What happened? Suddenly, the instructor's loud voice was heard. He stood up on the podium and addressed the other students who were still practicing. The leader, Instructor Amid, and Karaka stood there. Amid continued to speak. "As they know, fencing classes start from today. At them, they will experience the results of their 3 months of training. Now they will go and choose the right weapon for themselves. Henceforth, everyone will have the opportunity to handle the weapon freely for 2 hours. Under the supervision of the instructor, let them choose their favorite wooden sword." The students began to approach the barrels of wooden training swords and choose the best ones. Judith seemed to have quickly picked out the perfect weapon. It was a large broadsword that she grasped with both hands and began to swing. This weapon was perfect for her. Even if she swung it harder, the balance in her body would not be lost. The instructors looked at them with smiles. That's right. They made them stronger and more resilient for a reason. Now let them feel the fruits of their success. Lloyd has also chosen the perfect weapon. Even though this sword is wooden, it still feels so much better, so different. He can feel it with his whole body. The guy seems to have chosen a rapier or a saber or something. But suddenly, something caught his attention, and he looked away from his admiration and squinted his eyes. Something strange was happening there. Someone was approaching. Everyone looked at that person who was walking towards the gun rack. The guys took their eyes off their weapons and began to watch the student closely. Their faces showed genuine surprise. They even all froze for a second. Iron approached the weapons rack, Ilya standing behind and watching him over her shoulder. She was still uncomfortable seeing him, and they weren't socializing, but whatever, she was interested. Iron stopped near the weapons rack and began to intently select his sword. Come to think of it, he seemed to have already made his choice. He stood looking at the huge sword. It was very much like the one he had swung on his estate when he first picked up the weapon in his life. The boy looked at it as if enchanted, and his eyes sparkled. The boy reached out and took the weapon. It was perfect, the cold hilt immediately fitting into his hand, and he lifted the sword carefully. He took it in his hands and examined it closely. He felt that long, forgotten feeling when he first picked up the implement. The guy was focused. A small shiver ran through his body. The leader was standing next to him and smilingly kept looking at Iron, but the boy paid no attention to anyone at all. Now his eyes were fixed on his weapon. He wanted to remember what it was like to hold a sword. He swung. The boy didn't even feel the heaviness. The weapon was so light to him, like a feather. He almost didn't feel anything. The sword became an extension of his arm. He raised it high up. The guy let go of the sword with such force that the wind flew in different directions, kicking up dust. The force was incredible. Even if it was a simple perpendicular strike, it still looked impressive. Everyone else looked at him with surprise. Even the most capable disciple was a bit confused. They didn't expect this careless aristocrat to have such strength. For a second before them, fear flashed in their eyes. 781. Immediately, however, they came to their senses. It was nothing. Their former arrogance returned to them, although it was obvious from their faces that they were still impressed. Amid looked at the boy. Yes, his strut was a bit inaccurate, but still, it was almost exemplary. It simply couldn't have been before. This boy was holding a sword for almost the first time. Karaka too was impressed. The instructor squinted his eyes and looked more closely at the boy. It was not for nothing that he had first thought this guy was unusual. There was something in him, and now it was beginning to show. Elijah too was confused. The girl wasn't sure what she was seeing, and definitely didn't expect this kid to be able to do such a thing. The other students just scoffed as usual. They heard that it was the guy's first time picking up a serious weapon. He had never practiced swordsmanship, so he decided to pick up a huge sword and show off? Ignoramus. They started laughing. Lloyd didn't seem to be paying any attention to them, however, as he strode toward Iron with a firm gait. The others wondered what he was up to. Judith looked at him in disbelief. She still disliked this guy for his arrogance. What was he up to? She liked it less and less. Nothing good could be expected from this guy at all. Lloyd approached him and called his name. Iron continued to swing his sword, and only at the last moment did he notice someone approaching him. Lloyd put his wooden saber forward and said he was challenging him to a duel. Iron was a bit shocked. He didn't expect someone to challenge him to a duel right away. Everyone else was pretty shocked too. What the hell is he up to? Even the instructors were shocked, but the leader stood there and looked on with his benevolent smile. Iron looked at his future opponent and opened his eyes wide. He didn't expect to have to fight anyone at all now. He was still so inexperienced. A chill ran down his spine. The guy looked in the direction where the instructors were standing with the supervisor. He was looking for support, or advice, or permission. He didn't know what to do. The leader looked at him with benevolent eyes and smiled. It was as if he was making it clear that he was authorizing the duel. The old man himself was curious to see what would come out of it, whether the boy would be able to cope. Iron was silent. He was gathering his thoughts, and he wanted to make a final decision. On the one hand, he was scared. On the other, he wanted to show something to stop being bullied. He was tired of it, after all. Finally, he agreed. Looking at his opponent seriously, he said, "Yes." For a second, there was a glint of metal in his eyes. The guy was determined that he wanted to demonstrate something, even if it didn't work out. Around the boys, the men crowded to form a circle. Lloyd and Iron stood in the middle, preparing for a duel. They held their weapons in their hands, and a second more, and they would clash. Amid noticed this and shouted in anger, "What are they up to? They'll be practicing after class." The instructor couldn't allow such a mess during class. It had to stop immediately. Karaka stood and watched in silence. And why had he challenged Iron to a duel? They seemed to have taken his permission to use weapons at any time too literally. What the hell is going on here? We can't let anyone get hurt here. The instructor wanted to say that there should be order in everything, but the founders interrupted him and in a good-natured voice laughed and said that there were exceptions. Amid looked at him with completely surprised eyes. What is this even going on? The leader stepped between them and said that he was authorizing a duel. It was a real shock to everyone. It was the first time in the history of the academy that there were such exceptions. The guys stood opposite each other and prepared for the battle. However, the instructor made some adjustments. He said that if anyone was in danger, he would intervene immediately. Do they agree? The boys looked at each other with sizzling glances and nodded their heads, saying they were in complete agreement. The tension between them was starting to heat up, and now the battle was only seconds away. Iron stood at the other end of the hall, his opponent staring at him with a sizzling gaze. He swung his rapier and prepared to fly into the attack. The boy was extremely determined. Lloyd snapped out of his seat, and stretching out like an arrow flew forward straight at his opponent. The boy was like a beast. He saw only a victim, a rival to be taken out of his way. Iron put his huge sword forward and prepared to take the blow. He had no doubts, but fear ran down his spine as he saw his opponent approaching him at breakneck speed, and he had no idea what to expect. Fear flashed across his face, and he prepared to take the blow, but realized he couldn't back down. If he did, the shame would stain his name forever. He overcame his fear and tried to pull himself together. The sound of wood crashing against wood. The Lloyd struck a devastating blow, and at the last moment, Iron had time to put his sword out to cover himself from the blow. The pressure was very strong, but the boy stood firmly on his feet. His training was taking its toll. Lloyd continued to attack. The boy was determined to destroy his opponent, to once again prove to everyone that no one dared stand in his way, and besides, he wanted to learn how to do better. Iron successfully blocked the attack, but it was so strong that a big scratch appeared on the blade of his sword. The blow was very strong, and the boy barely managed to stay on his feet. It was a serious blow for him. He was even a little surprised and scared by such a force. How was he going to resist it? Lloyd continued to attack. He swung his weapon, and the wooden rapier sliced through the air. It was an extremely dangerous sight. The boy needed to be well prepared to do anything to counter his opponent. Once again, he lunged toward Aaron and fired his rapier forward straight at him. The wooden blade flew forward, slicing through the air with a whoosh. It flew just a few centimeters from the boy's head. The rapier even sliced through a clump of his hair. Aaron was very frightened, and another second, and he could have ended up dead. The boy had not expected such an onslaught. He retreated further and further away. The onslaught was too strong to withstand. The boy was genuinely afraid for his life. It seemed to him that one more mistake, and he would definitely die. And he didn't want that to happen. They fought, the boy only having time to defend himself. The blade of his sword was large, and he was almost completely covered from the attacks of his opponent. Lloyd made them so quickly that it was virtually impossible to keep track of his movements. The guys were watching from the side. Lloyd's henchmen were shocked. They were hoping that the Lord would put this loser down with a single blow, but the guy still held on. It was commendable. Judith was watching all this from the side and seemed to be extremely displeased. She folded her arms across her chest and frowned harder and harder with each passing moment. She was about ready to scream. The girl gritted her teeth. She wanted this upstart who was just bullying. It's not like it's a battle after all. This is just bullying. He's just testing iron. Lloyd continued to batter his opponent, trying to break through his defenses, but somehow he failed. His rapier soared forward, hitting its target with each strike. The guys were distant from each other. Aaron tried to hold on with all his might. The sword helped him partly, but he couldn't strike a single blow because his opponent was incredibly fast. Lloyd looked at him with a scornful look and prepared himself for another conclusion. This guy's reactions aren't bad, but the sword easily ruins his whole body balance. He seems to have missed the mark with his choice of weapon. Also, his stance was very inept. His technique was dismal. This guy is definitely interested in practicing fencing. This is a disgrace. His skills are worse than Lloyd thought. If that's the case, he's got something to check out. How about his power? Lloyd rushed toward him, swinging his weapon. Iron stood, waiting for another attack. The guy was already tired, and he wanted to hit his opponent at least once. Now, he saw Lloyd running straight at him in a frontal attack. It was his only chance. The boy's eyes went wide. Iron raised his sword in his hands and was about to deliver his crowning blow, from top to bottom, perpendicular sword thrust. His opponent saw this, but it was too late. The guy was even a little scared. He didn't expect Aaron to stop defending himself and try to strike. The boy lowered his sword with such force that it seemed if it hit, his opponent would definitely not survive. Lloyd was within a hair's breadth of death. The sword was coming at him faster and faster, and the boy didn't even have time to react. The blade, even though it was wooden, was still very dangerous. However, Lloyd's skills were enough to anticipate it. The boy took a step back to get out of the line of attack. In one deft move, he dodged and parried the attack before Iron could even think about it. His sword flew past his opponent and landed on the ground. Their gazes crossed. Iron was even a little afraid of what was about to happen. Fear flashed in his eyes, but it was too late to retreat. Lloyd swung his rapier, and in one deft motion, knocked the sword out of his opponent's hands. Iron didn't have time to react, and the weapon flew to the ground. The boy himself was barely on his feet. After flying a few meters, the huge sword hit the ground. It seemed the outcome of the battle was already clear. The wooden blade came close to his neck, signaling that his opponent had won. Iron didn't even have time to realize anything. His opponent's movements were much faster and more precise. The guy was even a little scared. The fight was over. The guys stood there for a few more seconds looking at each other. People crowded in even tighter so they could see everything as best they could. The winner is Brad Lloyd. It was obvious. People started clapping their hands. It was a really unexpected and very spectacular fight, although with a predictable ending. They all started shouting, and the whole room was filled with humming, so that it was impossible to make out who was talking about what. Karaka asked for their attention and took a small leaf in his hand. So now the last item on their schedule for today as well. They had divided them into classes, and tomorrow's fencing class would be held in a certain lineup. Class A, with Elijah, Lloyd, and Judy. It was kind of predictable. They were the best students in the class. As befits the strongest class compared to the other kids, their training is going to be tougher and harder, so mentally let them prepare. The instructor proceeded to call the dots were Mark Woodruff, Alfred Amaya Kickland, 35 in all. They are going to B class. Now let's go to C class. Judy looked at Aaron and told him to trust his big sister from the first grade. The boy nodded his head. He was a little confused, as he didn't know what class he would be placed in, although there were doubts that he was very capable. The instructor announced that there would be 54 people in the TS class. Suddenly they realized that the boy had not been named. Judy looked on with surprise and some disappointment. The instructor said the last one would be Iron. He would be assigned to Class F. The instructor said this with some disappointment, but there was nothing to do. Looking at the boy's abilities, another class was simply impossible to determine. Iron stood there, trying to figure out what had gone wrong in his life. He had been assigned to the worst class, the most incapable and inept students who were just starting to learn swordsmanship. However, he could not object in any way. After all, the council's decision was not disputed. It was over. They went for a walk. The girl was furious. She didn't know how to react. Okay, that's clear, but Braid is a jerk. He acted like a moron. The girl didn't know where to put her anger. Lloyd's behavior was just beyond normal. What an asshole. She was willing to bet he was using it to brag about his superiority to the others. Everyone knows he's a damn aristocrat. Does flaunting his status just make him feel good? The girl was furious. Iron stood by her side and didn't seem to care. Judith didn't want to stop. The girl was furious. Well, don't let it sour. All they need to do is erase a foot in the powder of the pre-assessment. The girl shouted. He's even pissed off with those rats tailing him. Suddenly, the girl shifted her gaze to Aaron and saw that he was just staring at her. What's he staring at? The guy looked at her in complete bewilderment. He honestly didn't understand why this girl was so angry. Apparently it didn't matter. He told Judith not to get so angry. He really did appreciate her worrying, but he didn't feel comfortable with her being angry with him. As soon as the girl heard those words, she immediately blushed red with embarrassment. What? Who said she was angry because of him? She was just shocked by such an answer. The girl immediately lunged at him with her fists, and Iron began to squeak. He was already bruised. All the students eventually went about their business after grading and distribution. Lloyd sat in his dormitory and prepared for the next training session. There was no time to waste. The boy had showered and was now wiping his head. He still couldn't get the battle out of his head. Something about it seemed very strange to him, something that he couldn't get out of his head. The boy flopped down on the bed and exhaled heavily. He was really tired today. Not only was he exhausted from training, but he was fighting an Iron that was much stronger than he'd thought. He opened his eyes and tried to steady his breathing and get his thoughts in order. One thing was bothering him. How did this happen? Even though he had won, he still didn't feel any better. He was going to meet it head on, but without realizing it, he dodged it. As soon as the boy remembered all this, goosebumps ran down his back. There was something strange about it after all. It wasn't just that Iron rushed at him in a frontal attack. At that time, his facial expression, stance, absolutely everything expressed a power that was impossible to overcome. He had all of his nature, all of his strength, in one vertical strike. The guy sat down on the bed, but what did he do? Did he just dodge? He was very ashamed, but he didn't understand why. He felt that he had backed off, and now it seemed to him that he was the loser on the contrary. What was his expression? Lloyd couldn't get over it. When he looked at the Aaron, what expression had been on his face? The more he thought about it, the more afraid he became. But what should he be afraid of? The boy was utterly confused. At this time, Iron was together with his teacher. Lund looked at him and asked, "So he's saying he doesn't know any kicks except perpendicular and oblique?" Iron looked at him with a guilty look and nodded his head apologetically. "Yes, that's right." The men laughed. He had nothing to apologize for after all. He hadn't studied the art of swordsmanship properly. Is it possible to show a good result at the beginning of one's journey? The man was completely calm. He would ask him another question now. What would it take for him, a boy who had fallen behind his peers in the art of swordsmanship, to catch up with them in skill? Iron thought for a moment and answered that it was probably more effort to be able to do it. However, the instructor shook his head. No, not at all. He picked up the sword of the Aaron, although it was wooden, but it didn't seem to bother the instructor at all. The man swung the weapon so fast that the boy didn't even realize it. There was a sound, like a blade slicing through the air. Pieces of earth flew in different directions. The man had cut the ground with a wooden practice sword. The man placed the blade next to him. There was a huge crack on the ground. It was hard to believe that this could be done with an ordinary training projectile. However, it looked so threatening that the boy had goosebumps running down his back a little. Iron looked carefully at the crack that was formed by the instructor's blow. However, of course, effort was also important. Depending on his efforts, he would be able to either keep up with the other students or even surpass them. But this is still not about him. Since the others started learning fencing a few years ago, the boy missed a lot of things. The instructor decided to give him a week for the boy to improve his performance. Iron frowned. It was an extremely small amount of time for him to catch up on what he had missed over the tables of years. Lund looked at him and said that if he learned all the basics of swordsmanship with the great sword, he would immediately assign him to the C class. The man seemed to be extremely serious. The boy would have to try very hard to catch up with all the things he had missed. However, it was a good challenge to test himself. A little frightened, Iron asked, "What if he failed in his training?" The man reassured him by saying that nothing would happen and that he would stay in his class and continue learning swordsmanship as usual. Then, a man walked up to him and, putting his hand on his shoulder, quietly said in the boy's ear, "But he had another one. If the boy feels he lacks talent, then let him better leave the academy himself and not torture himself. Then it's just pointless if the boy doesn't move himself." Iron heard this and clenched his fists. Out of complete confidence, he said that he would try hard. In the voice of the boy heard with incredible confidence, the man smiled. Well, let him try hard. He was already convinced that he was hard-working. So now it's up to him. Iron immediately grabbed his sword and began to train hard. He did not spare himself, as he wanted to prove at least to himself that he was not a loser. The boy decided firmly that he would become a swordsman, and in this, he will not prevent anyone. On the second day of training, the instructor also stood beside him and guided the boy. Lower your stance. Let him relax his shoulders. The boy followed all the teacher's instructions and obeyed all his commands. On the third day of training, he was already making progress. Even the teacher was slightly surprised that in such a short time, he was able to master a basic skill. Well done, well done. On the fifth day of training, the man was already sitting back and not correcting the boy. He noticed that he just had a great rack. Iron was trying his best. He was giving absolutely every effort he had. On the sixth day of training, the boy was already quite confident with the weapon. The instructor just stood there and looked at him with a surprised look. He himself could hardly believe that this boy had grown so much in such a short time. Iron continued to train without sparing himself. The instructor was extremely surprised that the boy had mastered such techniques in such a short time. He is improving faster every day, and his diligence has played a big part in that. Even he wasn't like this. For a second, the teacher was even a little envious. Even though at first glance you can't say so, this kid has a clear talent for fencing. In addition, he is incredibly diligent. Iron was literally burning with zeal. The guy did not spare himself. He practiced every day. The boy held a sword in his hands and pointed it toward an imaginary opponent. He practiced every stroke. And besides that, he listened diligently to the teacher. It seemed to him that every day he was getting better and better with the sword. The next day, they met Judith. He was holding the sword more confidently. The boy asked her if she would take one look. He had an evaluation tomorrow. The girl smiled and said that she would take a look. She was picky about that. If it's bad, she'll slap him. All right, let him show. The girl smiled and started to follow him. She was interested in how much the guy had progressed in his skills, because last time he had shown a bad result. Iron swung his sword, and the girl was even a little surprised at how much his skill had increased. It was just unreal. She was extremely surprised at how much the guy had improved his skills. The boy looked at her and asked how she was doing. He's getting good at this already. He really wanted to see how she would react, as this girl was an unwavering authority to him right now. There was literally steam coming off of him from his overexertion. Judith gave a thumbs up. She was surprised and pleased that her friend had succeeded so well. Her eyes were filled with genuine joy for him, and she had not expected him to succeed so well. Lun sitting in his office and drinking tea while reading a newspaper. Suddenly, an assistant rushed in and shouted, "Mr. Instructor, it seems he found a job in the rehabilitation department today." Really? It seems to be a rarity for this man to go to the workplace. The instructor sipped his tea loudly and nodded his head with a smile. Yes, that's right. He decided to work out today. He had glasses on his nose. The man seemed to be in high spirits. That kid got a C grade. That's unbelievable. Yes, during this time, Iron had improved his skills. He was already more confident with his sword, and within a week, he already looked like a real swordsman. That's pretty good. Judith was sitting about the dining room, eating her food. The girl was eating so fast that it was impossible to follow her. There were already several empty plates near her. She liked to eat a lot, and that was only because she was training hard. She walked over to Aaron and brought him a few more plates of food. Hey, let him take more food, and she knows as well as she does how important calories are. He works out harder than she does and eats very little. Iron looked at her fearfully and nodded his head. Yes, it's true. Lloyd and his buddies walked beside him, one of them chuckling in surprise. Mother dear, there's a hippo at the academy? Look how much she's gained. The girl looked at him over her shoulder and smirked. She kept chewing the whole time. The girl turned to him as if nothing had happened and asked, "He likes her, right?" The boy looked at her with a surprised and slightly stunned look. What did she just say? He hadn't expected that answer. His friend looked at him with surprise. He seemed to be hiding something from them. The girl noticed his embarrassment and started laughing. Let him forgive her, but it's not going to work out with him, so let him walk. He's not her type. Lance gave her a crazy look. What did she just say? She's out of her mind. He looked at her like he wanted to tear her up. What the hell was that girl doing? Lloyd, who had been standing beside them the whole time, shouted for them to stop fooling around and come with him. Lance nodded his head and said guiltily that he was coming. The guy seemed a little over the top. Lloyd didn't turn to face them and said, "They're acting like idiots. What kind of behavior is that?" The guy seemed to have changed, and now he didn't look like himself. It was extremely amusing to watch him change before his eyes. He, as a true teacher and mentor, told them to finally stop discussing others. What do they even do? It was no use anyway. The guys looked at him with a surprised look. They definitely didn't expect such a thing from their leader. However, they obediently agreed. Judith looked at them over her shoulder. It turned out that this insolent man had changed lately. It was highly unusual for her to observe such behavior, but it was for the best. The girl even cheered up a bit. Iron also looked up with a smile. She just shrugged. Suddenly, something came to his ears, and he turned his eyes to the side, and what he saw surprised him very much. By the way, there were a lot of people in the dining room. Next to him, across a few tables, was Ilya. A girl in general paid no attention to anyone, and with the same proud expression, sat down at the table. She was holding a plate of food. She looked like some kind of countess now. Judith looked at her friend, and a smile appeared on her face from ear to ear. She could see that they were both in a bad way. Had they had a fight? The girl was hinting at something indecent. Iron saw that and immediately started to justify himself. Why would they fight? The boy wondered if it was a quarrel between them. Judith noticed and asked him what he was thinking about. And indeed, the boy's expression was, to put it mildly, not very good. Iron looked at her and asked, "How's Elijah doing?" They were in the same class, so they probably saw each other a lot. The boy made an unsuccessful attempt to find out how the girl was doing. After all, they'd had a fight. Judith looked at him, put her hands on her breasts, and in all seriousness began to speak. "Young man, I think he said he had no quarrel with her, so let him go and ask him himself." Iron even rose from his seat and hesitated. Judith laughed. "Okay, she's just kidding. He's just being really cute. He's got a very funny reaction. She's going to tell you everything." She got a conspiratorial look on her face that usually didn't bode well. They looked at the girl together. All in all, no big deal. She's still at the top of the class and she's still performing well, which even the instructors can't help but recognize as such. In short, the girl hasn't changed a bit after their conversation. However, because of the big difference in abilities, the guys feel uncomfortable, so they don't even approach her, Judith included. Also, she heard that in the evenings, the girl goes to the small training ground by herself. It seems to be to practice the family techniques or something like that. Then, Judith smiled and told the guy that if he pumped himself up like that, he could basically go work out with her. Upset, he started begging her to stop bullying. He felt bad about it. The guy felt guilty, but he didn't know how to approach the girl. Soon, he and Judith went to practice together. They were on the training ground. The guy was holding a training shell and exhaled before attacking. The girl asked, "Is he definitely ready?" The guy nodded his head. A thumping sound rang out. They were moving so fast that it was impossible to see them. However, the sound here was quite loud. Lloyd was there too. He'd come to watch them practice. And as he stood there and watched in silence, the guy was starting to get annoyed. He wanted to appear strong, but so far he wasn't doing a very good job of it. Judith grabbed for her weapon and rushed to attack. The girl was exhausted. She was not going to give up, as she did not want to lose to this guy. But it was worth admitting that Iron had improved a lot in the meantime. The boy dodged her blow with a slight movement, and the blade of the blade whizzed by his head. He was more confident on his feet now and stopped himself from being hit. The girl saw this and immediately rushed into the next attack. She didn't seem like she was going to give in. Swinging her blade, she channeled all her power towards the boy. What is she doing? How could she do that? Their shouts were echoing everywhere. The fight was truly beautiful. Iron blocked the punch, even though he felt unbearable pressure from her. Still, the difference in experience was taking its toll. The boy wasn't going to give up. He didn't expect anything less from her. Her attacks were hard to fend off. He tried his best, but he could feel his grip loosening. The girl was so assertive that it was hard to control her. The boy tried his best. It was just unimaginable power. The two men bounced away from each other and were at a decent distance. Iron swung his sword, but he still couldn't hit the girl. He jumped to his feet and ran straight into a frontal attack. He was eager to show off his signature punch again. The guy swung and jumped up. If he could hit with his perpendicular punch, he'd win for sure. Judith stood a few centimeters away from him and looked up from below. The girl was ready for anything. It was a vertical section. She knew the move well, and it blocked fairly easily if you didn't hit it that hard. Iron didn't seem to have any intention of hitting weakly, though. She thrust her sword forward to block the blow. The girl was completely confident in her abilities because the guy was not as experienced as she was. She managed to block the blow, but immediately the girl felt that the blow was much stronger than she expected. Not bad at all. Except it still wasn't nearly enough. But inside, she was happy for the boy. She smiled broadly, but look at him. Not bad at all. A smile immediately appeared on her face. The girl was even proud. Iron cheered up too. He was happy that he was starting to do well. The training had not been in vain after all. The girl gripped her sword tighter. It seems this guy is going to be a challenge. He's much stronger than he looks at first glance. She clenched her teeth and prepared to attack once more. She wanted to prove that she was still worthy of being first. Her mount would not let her back down. Swinging her sword, she struck him with precision and speed. The guy, who wasn't expecting anything like that, flew off to the side. He wasn't strong enough after all. The boy felt a strong blow to his chest, and he flew backwards. He even caught his breath for a second. His eyes widened. He couldn't believe what had happened. It hurt, but he didn't feel it hurt. He flew backwards, the ground literally out from under his feet. Judith, for her part, did not stagger at all. Her blow was precise and swift, a blow that even Iron and his strength couldn't match. After flying a few more meters, the boy fell to the ground with a thud. He almost fainted from the impact, but he recovered quickly. Judith rejoiced. Wow! He's really grown up. He's really grown up. She ran up to him and stood beside him. However, he was still a long way from her. The girl proudly raised her sword. Iron looked at her with frightened eyes. Then she rose to her feet and said it was time to call it a day. Iron was surprised. So soon? The girl turned to him and said, "It's kind of night already. Look around. They're the only ones left here." Indeed, there was no one else in the gym but them. She added, "By the way, if he goes to the small training ground now, he has a lot of chances to catch Elijah there." As soon as Iron heard that, he immediately became embarrassed and waved his hands. When is she going to stop bullying? However, in his heart, he still had the desire to go and find out what happened last time. He wanted to explain himself. He didn't want to lose a friend like her. He didn't understand what was wrong. He hadn't done anything wrong. Ilya continued her training. The girl confidently held her sword in her hands. She looked in front of her and saw no obstacles. She was fully concentrated. All her inner energy was directed towards training. The girl even closed her eyes to concentrate better. With light steps, as if she was floating on air, she walked forward and was about to hone a new technique to her family. The girl opened her eyes, and for a second, she felt like someone was watching her. The girl opened her eyes, and for a second, she felt like someone was watching her. She saw a familiar silhouette in the distance and turned her head there. Who the hell was that? The girl was extremely annoyed that someone dared to interrupt her training. It was Iron, a guy standing a few feet away from her holding something in his hand. He looked embarrassed. They stared at each other for a few seconds without saying a word. The girl had a sword in her hand. The boy looked at her with a guilty look and said hello. He seemed a little embarrassed and even scared. After all, he knew how strong this girl was, so he shouldn't have made her angry. She looked at him with a disappointed look and asked rudely, "What did he want?" She was clearly in no mood to talk right now. She continued to stare at him and waited for an answer. She didn't really want to talk. She wanted to keep practicing. He came a few steps closer to her and held out a package and some paper. The boy said he had come to give something back. The girl looked at him with a surprised look. "What is it?" She looked at the gift. It was a small blue cloth bundle with something in it. And also, there was a note. Iron said he asked her to send him a gift from home. Here was a letter sketched out as well. That's a bit of a surprise, isn't it? Elijah looked at him, wondering why she needed it. The boy was silent. He didn't even know what to answer. Gathering his thoughts, he said that he had a younger sister. She stayed at home. She's not strong at all, not with people, and yes, they fight a lot. But still, it's his family. Because of misunderstandings between them, they often quarreled, and these quarrels were, mostly his sister was the initiator. However, the very next day, the guy would find a gift by his bedside and a small letter. His sister always sent him a gift the next day as an apology. It was incredibly sweet. and proof that she loved him after all. He scratched the back of his head and said embarrassed. He lacked eloquence. Even he didn't know how to start a conversation. He's not much of a communicator, so he thought it would be better to express his thoughts on paper, as his sister liked to do. Elia looked at him with the same serious look and asked, "Does he think that after reading this letter, she will start helping him again?" The boy didn't say anything, and then he said he was fine. After giving the girl the gift, he apologized for interrupting and went about his business. Let her keep practicing. The guy felt some strange feeling fulfilled for a long time, even if it wouldn't help. Still, he knew he had done it for a reason. The girl continued to stand there for a couple of minutes, staring in surprise at the guy. She hadn't expected him to dare to talk to her like that after their fight, and not only that, but to give her a gift. It was weird, but at least she hadn't thrown it away. Night was already falling outside. All the students had scattered to their places and were doing their own things. Elijah also went to your dormitory house, and she was honestly a little curious about what Iron had written in her letter. It was funny and even cute. She read the letter and smiled inwardly, like a little child. The girl had cooled down a little after all, and she thought she had been too hard on him when they had quarreled. Then, as she finished reading the letter, her eyes fell on the small bundle the boy had brought her as a gift. The girl looked at the sack with surprise. She walked over to him and unwrapped the pouch. There was a bracelet. It was small and fit her arm perfectly. It seemed to be made of some precious metal, like silver or platinum. The girl began to look at it. Her eyes widened at what she saw there. She was surprised. Of course, she knew that Iron was also from a noble family, and they also lived in wealth, but she didn't expect to see such an expensive gift. It was Adonis. On the bracelet, there was a small flower made of the same material as the bracelet itself. For a few seconds, she still couldn't take her eyes off it. The flower reminded her of something. Suddenly, as if something woke up in her soul, something very distant that had been sleeping in her heart for a long time, tears ran down her cheeks. She hadn't expected this, and she bit her lip to keep from bursting into tears right there. She felt as if something had stung her heart. She hadn't expected herself to react that way, and she tried to come to her senses. Finally, she managed to control her emotions and she calmed down. She stood still for a few seconds, trying to think. An interesting thought flashed through her mind. She started to look around the room. Maybe she had overreacted and was not the failure of their first fight. She felt a little guilty. A look of guilt appeared on her face. Perhaps she shouldn't have accused him of something she herself didn't understand. She looked out the window, where the bright sunlight was giving the last of its light, painting the sky in vivid colors. She'd been wrong to accuse him after all. She'd have to apologize at some point. The next day, Iron and Judith practiced again. The girl did not spare him and tried to get the most out of him. The people crowded around them, curious to see how the negligent prince was fighting with a high-ranked girl. Judy stretched and said she was going to be tougher today. Iron, who was standing next to her, asked if they could take it slow. He wasn't experienced enough to do such rigorous training. Suddenly, Lloyd walked in. He walked with a confident gait straight ahead. The boy seemed determined. He literally didn't notice anyone around him and headed straight for Judy and Aaron. What does he want? Judy looked at him with a surprised look. What did he want? She hadn't expected that the man who had ignored them all this time was suddenly interested in them. She was even a little startled. That's a lot of assertiveness. Lloyd walked up to them. Judy immediately asked him head-on what he wanted. Come to harass again? They looked at him, expecting anything. Iron was a little scared. Lloyd came up to them and said that he had something to say to Judith. The girl even got a little freaked out by that. What's that? What would they talk about? She was ready to explode. This guy was really pissing her off, and now he was coming here and saying something. Then he turned to Aaron and told him to listen to him. The boy twitched a little. What was that all of a sudden? What happened? Suddenly, Lloyd said, out of the blue, that he would like to train with him. Everyone else fell silent and exhaled heavily. Judith even got a little downcast. Did he not have everyone at home? Lloyd's henchman almost choked. However, the boy continued as if nothing had happened. He said that in the last evaluation procedure, Iron had shown a concentration that he would never achieve. His score was unbelievable, and now Lloyd would like to learn from him. Iron stood and looked at him dumbfounded. The boy had expected anything but this. Lloyd beat his chest and responded by saying that in return, he was offering to teach him how to wield a sword. Yeah, that's what you'd expect. The boy said they should help each other overcome their shortcomings to move on together. For a second, there was silence in the hall. No one had expected such a turn of events, and everyone stood silently waiting for an answer. Man, this isn't interesting at all. Judith looked at them and asked, "What's the big deal? What's he up to?" "Whatever he's doing, it's all for a reason, and every time he comes to them, some shit happens, so something must be going wrong now. Last time he challenged Iron to a duel. What's he trying to do now? That doesn't sound like him at all. He wants to use him to move up?" Lloyd wondered, use it? He looked at them with a surprised look. This guy knew what he wanted out of life after all. Then he said, without any hesitation, "Yes, that's exactly what he wants to do." Judith choked up at that. Holy shit, he's a cheeky face. It was starting to piss her off. Seconds more and they'd have a fight. "However," Lloyd said with a completely calm expression on his face, "what's wrong with that?" As if there was some crime in it. The boy sincerely did not understand why they reacted that way. They stood across from each other and talked. Lloyd said that he could have achieved such results on his own, but there was one thing. Iron looked at him with a surprised look. The boy hadn't expected the sudden attention he was getting. Well, there's one thing. In an academy like this, that approach is ineffective. If they train together, it's possible they could achieve far greater results than alone. Besides, the two of them will use him as much as he uses them. Then he turned to Judith. She herself is always practicing with Iron instead of lessons. He feels he should learn from a lot of people. Their knowledge doesn't end with the academy program. He suggests that they should think bigger so that they can only succeed. The guy seemed to be extremely serious. He clenched his fist and said that this was their only chance. He will learn new things from the other students here under the pressure of stiff competition, and he will achieve a qualitative growth in his abilities. The other students watched this whole conversation with amazement. This is just unthinkable. A Class A student wants to train with a Class C student. It was mind-boggling, but it was actually happening. One of the students clenched his fist. It looked really cool, just like grown-ups. The girl standing next to him looked in his direction in surprise. Why would she do that? She didn't understand anything. But still, Iron agreed, albeit after a bit of deliberation. He said firmly that he was willing to try. Judith looked at him with surprised eyes. She certainly hadn't expected that. The boy asked if he was sure it was a good idea. Iron soberly assessed his chances. He was behind him in every way. He didn't have the agility and speed. What was he planning to learn from him? The boy was already interested in all of this more than anything else. Lloyd looked at him with a serious look. He'd said there was something about him he couldn't get enough of, hadn't he? The boy grinned his grin, which usually led to bad consequences. However, it seems. Now he didn't intend anything bad, but just really sincerely wanted to learn something. He's been thinking about it since the end of the midterm. That doesn't sound like him. What the hell was the problem? He was also trying just as hard. Why was there such a difference between them? In addition, they spent exactly the same amount of time practicing too, so he couldn't understand what the problem was. It turns out that Iron is different from him in something else. Finally, it was starting to dawn on him, or so he thought. The boy opened his eyes, and it was as if it had hit him. Of course he did. How could he not have guessed? All students were given a limited amount of time. Iron practiced harder than the others during this time. Quality time utilization, that's the problem. This kid has never once lost concentration since he started his training. He's paid attention to nothing else but his training. Now, Lloyd understood perfectly. They looked at each other straight in the eye. Lloyd said he'd have Iron teach him how to keep his mind focused all day long. The boy looked at him with a completely serious look. Iron didn't understand a thing. He didn't know what he could teach such a skillful student after all. He was even embarrassed for a second and lowered his eyes. The boy said in a guilty voice that he didn't understand how it came out. It just happened. He just did what he had to do. Lloyd turned around and said that was the expected answer. All geniuses think alike. Judith and Iron looked at him. The boy looked confused. What was he talking about? What genius? He's not like that at all. What the hell kind of genius is he? Lloyd looked at him over his shoulder, however, and that look said it all. No, one glance was enough to see the talent in him. It was not an easy task to keep his concentration at the highest level at all times, and yet he did it perfectly. The conversation ended with Lloyd saying he had a personal training session today, so he went over there. Judith, and she's joining them tomorrow too. The girl was freaking out. What was the big deal? She hadn't agreed. What kind of self-rule is this? The boy walked a few steps, stopped, and said he had a little advice for Aaron. The boy stood and looked on with surprised eyes. After thinking for a while, Lloyd said in a serious voice for Iron to never belittle himself. Absolutely not. He didn't seem to be joking now. Iron stood a few feet away from him and listened intently. It seemed to be the first time he'd ever been told something like that to his face. Lloyd continued to speak. He said that Iron was the descendant of a noble family. He wasn't sure about the beginning, but right now, his actions and skills were befitting a member of a noble family. Therefore, let him have pride and show others his confidence. Iron still stared after him with surprised eyes. Judith stood a little farther away, wincing. He had a way with words, of course, and she was getting sick of his constant chatter. Well, it's a good choice, but it's better than practicing alone. The next day, as agreed, they began to train together. Lloyd coached Aaron, steering him in the right direction each time. He's in too much of a hurry. Aaron held the sword with both hands and concentrated. Lloyd looked at him and said in a good-natured voice that his movements would be precise only when he achieved a balance between his body and his stride. Iron nodded his head and looked at him understandingly. That's it. Lloyd moved forward and made a large and precise lunge forward. His rapier flew forward like a spear. His movements were as precise and fast as they could be. Judith walked past them. She was annoyed that she had to train with this upstart she couldn't stand. Lloyd looked at her and said they were done, so she didn't want to practice. The girl yelled again that she didn't. The boys looked at each other and smiled. Lloyd asked his comrade how long he thought it would last. Iron answered that, since there was no swearing, he thought it would last about a week. They both laughed. Then they went to the dining room to recuperate after their hard workout. Judith was eating for 3, as usual, and Iron sat on the opposite seat, watching her eat. Suddenly, the boy shifted his gaze to the side. Something caught his attention. Surprise and even some fear flashed across his face for a second. Elijah was quite near. She was carrying a plate of food and looked down at Aaron. The boy found her eyes and cried out in surprise. Would she really pay attention to him? Elijah walked past him and said she had read his letter. Iron looked at her with a smile. The guy continued eating his lunch. A smile flashed across the girl's face for a second. He seemed to have done the right thing. He even sighed a little. Judith, as soon as she saw his expression, asked, "Did the confession go well?" Iron noticed this and immediately began to justify himself again. She got it all wrong. Looking at the girl's expression, it was easy to guess what she was thinking. Night had fallen. The sky was already dark, and thick clouds covered it almost completely. Everyone scattered to their own rooms to rest before tomorrow's hard training. Iron was lying in his bed, thinking. Today's training with Laird had paid off. As he said, he needed to think about concentration, but he didn't understand how he could improve it. The thought kept him awake, and he couldn't sleep. He closed his eyes and thought that if he could do this, it would be much easier. He would have to concentrate on how to improve his stance. If he managed to advance even a little bit, it would already be a good result. The man he had dreamt about for so long, the one he wanted to be like as much as possible, was back in front of his eyes. He found himself in a dream again, and saw this man who had come to him more than once. He was still practicing with his huge sword a little further away, watching. The boy didn't fully realize that he was in his dream. He took a small step forward and stretched out his hand. As if passing through a wall, he saw his body begin to materialize before he was as if transparent. Even though it was a dream, it was extremely realistic. The boy could feel his hand fully. As if he were in the real world and not in his dream, he moved forward to approach the man. It was the same dream I had before. There was this man again, practicing all the time. He could feel not only his hands, but his whole body. It was really a very strange dream that allowed him to accurately feel all the senses. All the sensations of the man who was practicing right in front of him were clear as day. He was swinging his weapon and practicing strikes day in and day out. It was so realistic it sent shivers down the boy's spine. And then he woke up. The boy was covered in cold sweat. It was such a realistic dream that he still had the sensations. He was breathing heavily and trying to realize where he was now. He looked out the window and saw that it was still night. He finally realized that he was in his room and everything was fine, but the feeling of the dream still lingered. He realized that he immediately needed to get his hands on the ball before he lost the feeling. He went straight to the practice area, forgetting that he needed to sleep. He practiced all night until the morning. The boy never got a proper rest. However, right now, he wasn't thinking about that at all. Judith saw his face. Iron looked bad to say the least. He had huge black bags under his eyes. He was all disheveled, and he didn't seem to have slept at all. The girl asked him what he had been doing all night. The guy just waved her off. Soon, she got into the rack and began practicing with Lloyd. The boy constantly instructed her. "Don't relax." The girl was already starting to get annoyed. "Stop showing off." She hit him with her sword and the boy didn't react at all. She started to yell. He told her not to relax, but what was he doing? Indeed, Lloyd seemed to have completely forgotten that he was training and was looking away. He's a slippery one. Soon, the girl herself looked in that direction and saw Iron sleeping soundly on a bench. What the hell was that? Rise. She immediately started to wake him up. Lloyd told her to leave him alone. It seems this guy is pretty exhausted and now he's sleeping. No need to wake him up. Iron heard all of this perfectly well, and as soon as the words reached his ears, he immediately jumped up and grabbed his sword. What? He sat on the bench and looked at the two friends. A second later, the boy jumped to his feet, grabbed his weapon, and began practicing his moves again. As if he hadn't slept a second ago. What's wrong with him? What is he doing? But after another second, he went back to sleep as if nothing had happened. This confused everyone around him. Did he hit his head while he was doing this? What the hell is he doing? How can you sleep in training? They called his name again, and Iron immediately opened his eyes. It seemed like this guy was only closing his eyes for the sake of appearances, but he was actually awake. His sword was standing next to him. Lloyd walked up to him, apologizing for interrupting. He asked, "What does he do?" Iron looked at him with a surprised look. The boy looked surprised for a second. Then he realized what he was talking about, and scratching the back of his head, he replied, embarrassed, that he was trying to improve his concentration. But he didn't expect it to work very well, but he didn't expect it to work quickly. Lloyd heard that, and he was glad, meditating. He had heard of such a technique, calming his soul and looking back, right? The boy didn't quite know what he was talking about, but he agreed. Then Lloyd laid down on the couch beside him and fell asleep as well. Or he wasn't asleep, just trying to concentrate his thoughts. Oh great, then he'll try it once. The boy lay on the couch, immersed in his own thoughts. He was thinking. It seemed to be starting to work, or he understood how it worked. I'm as bad as I thought. I need to be a little calmer, a little more. Eventually, he was awakened by one of his friends. He began to hear the words, "Mr. Catch." He opened his eyes and saw one of his companions looking at him with a frightened and surprised look. The boy immediately got up as if nothing had happened. His friend looked at him in surprise and said he thought his master was asleep. Lloyd said he was just meditating. Everyone else looked at him in surprise, and Judith just chuckled quietly on the sidelines. Then she started messing with him. So he meditates by snoring and drooling. Just like that, huh? Lloyd, as soon as he heard this, started wiping his mouth. His comrade looked at him and closed his eyes in shame. It seems he had miscalculated a bit. He finally realized that the problem was his posture. The boy immediately sat in lotus posture, folded his legs in the correct position, and began to meditate. You usually sit in this posture, right? Judith leaned over to him and began to resent him. What an asshole. He should realize that Iron was just a natural, and he was just being a dick about it. Lloyd looked at her with a displeased look. He'll try it first, and then he'll decide whether it's bullshit or not. The girl said irritably, "Let him do what he wants." The founder of the academy walked around his office and asked, "Nothing interesting has been going on lately? Seems like things have been quiet lately." Karika stood next to him and said that everything was going his way, and by the way, Iron had moved up to Class B. He seemed to have improved quickly thanks to Judith and Lloyd's help. As soon as the founder heard that, a smile stretched across his face. Was that it? The old man was extremely happy to see such a famous one. The coach said that Mr. Leader was damn right. The man started smiling too. They both seemed pleased with their students' progress. It was just an amazing result. The man opened his eyes and said that Lloyd had caused a small wave of change this year. At that time, a mysterious smile appeared on his face. It seemed that something interesting was coming, something that hadn't happened in the academy for a long time. At this time, the students, led by Lloyd, were meditating. Everyone was seated in the same lotus posture. Iron was there too, all of them immersed in their thoughts and tuning their spiritual energy. It was an entertaining sight. The training sword fell to the floor with a loud sound. The fight was over. The winner had been determined. Judith and Lloyd were competing against each other. The coach stood between them and raised his hand to say that Lloyd was the winner. Judith was lying on the ground, moaning with resentment. Oh, that bastard, how did this happen? As soon as the girl got to her feet, then unwilling to accept defeat, she shouted, "This isn't fair. That doesn't count. You gotta redo." The guy just laughed at her, looking over his shoulder at her. The coach turned to her, urging her to calm down. The girl looked at him guiltily and blushed. Yes, she had gone overboard after all. But still, she couldn't stand the fact that this guy got her in so easily. She approached him and threateningly told him that after school, she was waiting for him in the backyard. Another fight. The guy grinned. As much as you want. He's confident in his abilities. Amid looked at them and smiled. Well, here are some funny guys. They are both developing their skills at an incredible rate. Okay, enough of admiring each other, it's making him sick. But you have to admit, it looked pretty funny from afar. Lloyd in particular stood out among them. The gap between them and Judith, who used to rush for second place, is gradually beginning to appear. It is visible to the naked eye. The guy looked at his hand. Great. He could feel with his whole body and soul how he was getting better every day. The boy was surprised and pleased with his success. At this rate, he would soon rise even higher, and then he would have the second place in his pocket. For a second, he thought that if he put in even more effort, he might be able to contend with first place. He looked over to where Ilya was standing, practicing at her usual pace. He looked at her with a sidelong glance, and yet he knew inside that he was still a long way from her. The girl stood in a perfect stance. She had perfect concentration. She was completely focused on her training. At this moment, it was as if nothing else existed for her. The sword soared upwards, piercing the sky with its blade. Even though it was a training sword, it was already tattered and had many scratches on it. Iron continued to train. The boy was fully concentrated. His physical performance was growing rapidly. He did not expect such results from himself, but it should be said that he was very satisfied. He could not relax, and the boy practiced every day. Meditation helped him improve his results, quite dramatically. He looked in front of him and concentrated fully on his training. The boy knew that this wasn't the end of it. He needed to meditate more because this stuff had helped him raise his skill level a lot. He was already preparing to strike another blow at his imaginary opponent when suddenly someone called out to him. They were familiar voices, and the boy already realized who it was. Just a little more, still not enough. But then he was distracted. Lloyd, along with Judith, was approaching him from the back. The boy asked him if he was getting too hung up on the perpendicular strike alone. Iron looked behind him in surprise. The guy waved his hand and invited him to go with them, the leader asking everyone to gather. Judith looked at him with surprised eyes, as if it was the first time she had heard about it. Iron agreed. Okay, it's in the auditorium, right? Iron picked up his clothes and started to get dressed. No, they will be in the grand training arena, answered Lloyd. The arena? The guy was even a little surprised. We usually have a final evaluation, so it must be something serious. Indeed, there were a lot of people gathered in the training arena, almost all students, and at the head of everyone was the founder who stood in front of them and was pushing a speech. The old man stood in front of them and smiled sincerely. It was obvious that he was genuinely happy to see his wards. The 9 months since they had entered the academy had flown by unnoticed. They had managed to endure a large number of exams and tests and rigorous trainings, proud of their brilliant progress. Iron, Judith, and Lloyd sat in the front rows, watching the professor, looking him in the mouth. Let's get to the point. The man became suddenly serious. We're going to talk about the final evaluation. After saying that, everyone was visibly tense. This is an incredibly important event where you have to perform at your best. No one expected it to be so soon. Lloyd opened his eyes even wider. The boy hadn't expected this. Goosebumps ran down his back. It would be different from the midterm, in which they had to fulfill a certain standard of some discipline. It might sound a little abstract, but it would be different on the final assessment. He would like to see their hidden talents. The old man smiled even wider, indicating that something interesting was about to happen. The boys would have to show what they could do. The old man noticed the confusion and fear on the faces of the students, and laughed and said that there was no need to be afraid, and to look for hidden meanings in his words. But Iron still tensed up. All the students were required to do was to show the best side of themselves they thought they had. The old man continued to explain. He said that they could demonstrate a special strike, or an unusual maneuver to confuse the enemy. In other words, they are allowed to use any means to show their capabilities. Let them try. The old man was sure that everyone here was capable of showing their strengths. That's why he'll spend the rest of the 3 months giving it his best shot. By the way, there was something else he wanted to show them. The old man threw off his cloak with a slight movement of his hand. The old man stood in front of them in a fighting stance and adopted a peaceful expression. He seemed to be immersed in his own mind, holding a large and beautiful sword, apparently very, very old. Iron tensed, even if it was only the old man's dance in his own way, but he would appreciate it if the students learned something from it. The old man said it with some irony. His face was back in a beaming smile. He was completely calm and focused. The man wanted to show the students something special, or at least he thought he did. After a pause of a few seconds, the old man opened his eyes and prepared himself. His gaze was serious now, but he still had that satisfied smile on his face. The man braced himself and braced himself. Not even a second later, he swung his sword, and a wave of blinding white light erupted from his blade and flew straight forward. He moved his arms as easily as if he was not 90 years old, but 20 years old. That's what a huge amount of experience and constant training meant. Ilya's eyes opened wide in surprise. Even she, with her years of experience and training, could not reach such an amazing level. The girl was completely shocked and confused. Yet the old man's dance was mesmerizing. He swung his weapon as easily as if it were an ordinary feather. A blinding white light streamed out from his blade. Everyone concentrated on him, unable to take their eyes off such a marvelous sight. Judith opened her eyes even wider. Her jaw dropped in surprise. She realized that she would hardly ever be able to reach such a level. It was simply something unreal. The old man moved like a true master. Well, he was. His movements were smooth, but at the same time, very fast, almost impossible to follow. He appeared in different places as if he were teleporting. He showed everything he was capable of, and the children watched with genuine delight. Iron stood there, and as if enchanted, he stared at it. It was the first time he'd ever seen something like this, and it stirred a memory in him. He remembered how the man in his dreams had moved in exactly the same way, and now he was seeing it in person. The old man moved faster and faster, his body completely absorbed by the light coming from his blade. All the while he was smiling. It was an incredible sight. The movements were honed to perfection. The boy stood and watched, his mind unable to comprehend what was happening, yet he still couldn't look away. Suddenly he realized that he understood how to do it, understood every movement, and seemed to be able to just redo it himself. It was an inexplicable, exhilarating feeling. You'd think the man was completely absorbed in his dance, but he shifted his gaze to the boy and noticed the way he was looking at him. He was still smiling, but he kept watching the faces of the students as he danced. He took a light step back, as if floating in the air. Even though he was already of advanced age, his physical form was impressive to say the least. He swung his weapon, cutting through the air and stopping almost at the ground. From his blade, streams of air flew in different directions and filled the entire space of the training hall. The old man stopped. A sound wave left him, which briefly deafened the others. Lloyd couldn't believe what he was seeing. The boy froze in place, a look of delight on his face. He couldn't say anything. The sight he had just witnessed struck him to the core. The perfect technique, the perfected movements. It was incomparable to anything else. The old man stood in front of the students and finished his dance. That was the end of it. The students looked at him with rapt attention. No one had anything to say. It was truly an amazing sight. At this, the founder chose to leave. Finally, he wished them good luck and moved between the rows of students toward the exit. The children sat in their seats with surprised faces. No one could even say a word. This strange and at the same time mesmerizing sight touched them to the core. One of the students asked in a trembling voice what he had just seen. His friend, who was sitting next to him, could not find anything to say because he was in complete shock. Suddenly, the boy sitting next to him said, "My blade." The boy looked at him with surprised eyes. "What's that?" It was incomprehensible. What was he even talking about? Suddenly, it was as if the guy had an epiphany. What's wrong with his blade? It was funny. His eyes literally glittered. Soon, the guys went about their business. The interview was over. Everyone was still under the impression that no one knew what to talk about. What the founder had shown them was an incredible sight. It was the first time they had ever seen something like this in their lives, and they realized that it was unlikely that they would ever be able to achieve such a level of skill. Lloyd and Judith stood in the hallway. The girl didn't know what to say. The boy sighed heavily and said that they could use some rest after what they had seen. It had overwhelmed them, and it seemed like they needed to recover a little. The girl still couldn't say a word. They sat down on a bench next to each other. Lloyd continued. He said that yesterday's performance of the leader was something. She didn't think so. A begging sign. The guy kept talking. He felt like he was getting uncomfortable somehow. Who was he even talking to now? The wall? The girl didn't say anything back at all. "Hey, is anyone home?" She was silent and just stared dumbfounded in front of her. Suddenly, she exploded, "Shut up already." She started yelling at him. Is that why she's always losing her temper? What is wrong with her in the first place? Lloyd looked at her and asked wryly, "Girl, are you not in the mood? I think this guy's about to get his ass kicked." They continued to sit in that seat. The guy asked if it was because of Aaron that she was so upset. As soon as the girl heard that, she got embarrassed and asked, "What did he have to do with it? What does that have to do with it?" But still, a shadow of embarrassment was clearly visible in her eyes. She couldn't recover. She just kept silent and stared at herself. Something was troubling her, but she didn't want to, or she couldn't say it. Who knows what was going through her mind? Lloyd kept talking. He looked up and he thought. Judith said they had a final evaluation coming up, and this guy's been meditating all day. Would it be okay? The guy replied that he didn't have to worry. He was 100% sure that Iron would pass the test. The girl was pissed off. And how does he know? She exploded again. The guy stood up and said, "What were the criteria for the final grade?" The girl was a little confused. "What do you mean? You have to show hidden talents, right?" He turned around and nodded his head. Exactly, hidden talents. He had an enigmatic smile on his face, looking at her as if he wanted her to guess everything, not to give her such clues. She looked at him with a surprised look. The guy in turn continued. In other words, they should not demonstrate their current abilities, but the future that is yet to be revealed. Who does she think showed the most hidden talents in the 9 months spent at the academy and made the fastest progress? The girl got up from her seat and sarcastic replied, "But of course she knows who. Yes, it's Iron, so let her stop whining and get up." Lloyd was a little annoyed at her stupidity. The girl exploded. "What? Who cares?" She was ready to punch him in the face right now. They went to the training hall to continue their training. The girl was determined. She would show off her skills to the fullest, and first place in the final evaluation was in her pocket. She seemed to be completely sure of that. Lloyd said he was afraid it wouldn't work out. Elijah's going to beat the odds this time too. As usual, he'll take first place. Judith got mad as soon as she heard. Why her again? How she hated it. She wanted to be first somewhere, and she was not going to give up. She herself is well aware that this girl comes from a distinguished family of swordsmen. Such families on their continent can be counted on a handful of fingers. This girl's family studied the martial arts that helped them get the title of a distinguished family. Therefore, there's simply no way she can rank me first in the final evaluation. To Judith, however, this did not seem to serve as a valid argument. The girl asked angrily again, "Does he think that's reason enough not to even look toward first place?" Lloyd replied that it was, because it's not about how good the martial arts and techniques themselves are, but it's also about her persistence. Judith was angry again, for her persistence knew no equal. She was getting mad. This is so infuriating. Then why the hell would you have an exam with a predetermined result? It's just useless. What's so great about these noble families, and her older brother, who used to be called the most famous genius on the entire continent? The girl was simply furious. The boy looked at her with a calm gaze and said nothing. Judith continued to sputter. She would lose to an orphaned commoner who couldn't even raise her eyes in front of the others. As soon as Lloyd heard that, he looked at her with a surprised look. He seemed a little hurt by it. The girl saw the confusion on his face and asked him what he was looking at, but the boy seemed to be scared. There was something that made him shut up and settle down a little. Eventually, they both turned around and saw Elijah behind them, who I looked at and said nothing. Things were starting to heat up. Things were getting bad, and now it looked like they weren't going to go away. The others also looked in their direction with fear. They realized that now it seemed someone had awakened the beast, and something was going to happen. Something very, very bad. Elijah looked at them with a stern look. There glittered resentment, fury, and malice. But the girl did nothing yet. Then came her voice. It was angry, but calm. She said she didn't care, that she had insulted her and her family. She didn't care what people like her were saying behind her back. It didn't hurt her at all. Of course, she was lying. It hurt her a lot, but she tried her best to keep her cool, not to make trouble. Judith, on the other hand, was angry. Oh yeah? Then let them fight one more time. Lloyd stood between them, and he felt a little uncomfortable, like he was standing between two angry bulls. The boy tried to reconcile them. Fighting at university can get you expelled forever. That's not the way to do it. Elijah said in a calm, yet angry voice, "That's right. She'll still take first place this time, and from now on, she'll take it over and over again." She was sure of what she said, and no one seemed to doubt it. Her family's sword techniques? They had no use here. Lloyd looked at her with surprised eyes. The academy program alone was enough that she was a head taller than them. It was a bit arrogant, but basically true. The guy ran up to her with a quick stride. He wanted to ask the girl something before they finally broke up. He said that her family's family technique, it's the sword of heaven, isn't it? Its name was established after they captured the demon dragon king 400 years ago, right? He knew very well, didn't he? Amazing knowledge. The girl turned to him and nodded her head. So, what of it? It didn't change anything. She was still evil. The guy smiled and said in a snide voice that he would like to see how good this technique was, because he had never seen it, and they say that it is so legendary that it has no equal in the whole world. The girl turned her back to him and just said, let him dream about it. She didn't seem to have any further dialogue with anyone. She went off somewhere to do her own thing. He threw her a parting shot. Yeah, that's a shame. Then he swung his sword, but something was wrong. He felt that something had changed, and for the worse. His hands were not obeying. The sword was flying anywhere but in the right direction. The guy was getting frustrated. Let her remember something. He squinted his eyes, and his voice transformed. So, if she shows me her heaven sword technique, the first place will be his, and that will be an undeniable fact. The guy said it very firmly and confidently. After saying that, the girl stopped and opened her eyes even wider. She became even angrier, which only gave her the strength to try harder, to finally show everyone what she was worth. Soon, she was off somewhere else. Iron continued to train. He wasn't concerned with dismantling nobles, he was just practicing technique. The boy was holding his heavy sword and practicing a perpendicular strike, a strike that he was determined to elevate into the absolute. He was swinging his sword, but something was wrong. He felt that something had changed, and for the worse. His hands were not obeying, the sword was flying anywhere but in the right direction. The guy was getting frustrated. It didn't feel the same. He thought he was getting closer, but it turned out he was just getting further away. The guy was getting frustrated. It was as if he was chasing an elusive shadow he couldn't catch. Lately, it seemed to him that he had lost all his talent, and everything he had been doing all these months was useless. The old man he saw in his dreams every day still stood before his eyes, but now something was different. It seemed to him that he was getting farther and farther away from his ultimate goal. The boy couldn't keep up, but what was he doing wrong? He couldn't figure it out. He had to concentrate again, so he sat down in lotus pose and decided to start with meditation. It always worked for him, and he hoped it would this time too. He concentrated, relaxed his whole body, and began to meditate. Wait a minute. He opened his eyes, his head suddenly visited by an interesting thought that could basically help him. The boy thought. He looked toward where his weapon lay. His hand instinctively reached for the hilt. What if he meditated with the weapon in his hands? In principle, it could help, because that was what the man in his dreams had done. He grasped the hilt, raised the sword, and began to meditate in that state. Yes, it made some sense. The guy could feel his internal energy flows changing. The sword swung. It flew like a bullet. The blade struck the target. The enemy was struck down. Lance fought his comrade. He easily defeated him and knocked the weapon out of his hands. The boy grimaced and felt his arm begin to ache. He gave up and admitted his loss. Lance was already celebrating his victory. The guy looked at his weapon and smiled. Lloyd appeared from somewhere, and when he saw his friends practicing, he smiled and laughed. They're workaholics. The boys were immediately distracted from their study and looked at their comrade. Pride glistened on their faces. Lloyd stood beside them and looked at the boys with an ironic smile. He looked at Lance and said satisfactorily, "Was it just him, or was the guy starting to train harder?" "Well, that's very commendable." The guy waved his hand and said, "So the evaluation is coming up, but it still wasn't perfect." Besides, Lloyd himself unknowingly showed great influence over them. The boy was surprised, was he? But how? He was just being his usual self, yes. Something had changed in him, but how did it affect his comrades? It was still a mystery. The boy looked at him and smiled, saying that the words he had said to Linya that day had been a very good incentive for them. A wide smile appeared on his face. He didn't seem to hesitate for a second. Yes, this guy had also changed. From the first time they met, it was as if his brain had woken up in his head. Lloyd was embarrassed and said that he didn't remember saying anything like that, but it's worth admitting that he felt good that his changes had motivated someone else. So, he's doing the right thing. Judith's voice came suddenly. She was as usual in her repertoire. The girl made a disgruntled grimace and said, "Stop staring like that, it's making her sick." Lloyd snapped out of his musings and looked at the girl in surprise. She looked at him with a cheerful look and told him to pick up his sword because they were going to spar. The girl was in full bloom as always, and she always had a cheerful spirit. But how could she do that? Soon, they started sparring. A cloud of dust rose in the training room. The guys were doing their best. Now, they were practically on the same level. The training was paying off and quite noticeable. They fought to the death, with honor and self-love at stake. Judith swung her sword and struck fast and hard. Lloyd, meanwhile, was precise. His concentration had increased considerably, and now his blows were even more accurate. During another of her swings, the girl saw the rapier blade coming towards her face. Just a little more, and she would lose. The girl needed to react now. At the last moment, she deflected, and the blade passed just a few centimeters from her face. She could even feel the rush of wind that went with it. It was a little creepy, but she managed to dodge. He was much faster. The girl couldn't help but notice it. Oh, damn it, they stripped him. She swung even harder and wanted to hit him as hard as she could to show him where he belonged, but suddenly she saw another blow coming at her. She had to dodge immediately. The girl put up a block and felt an unbearable pressure. The guy was not only faster, but also stronger by several times. She blocked his blows, but she could still feel how much his skills had increased. He's not just perceptive. The girl took a closer look at him. Something about this guy had changed, something that made him be even better. He had honed his skills almost to the limit. He was almost unrecognizable. The girl swung her weapon, but the enemy bounced back with a light movement, and his movements became smooth, making him almost impossible to keep up with. The girl swung her weapon, but the opponent bounced back with easy movements. Moreover, his movements became smooth, and now it was almost impossible to keep up with him. The girl thought for a moment, but she pushed those thoughts away, but she couldn't help but admit that maybe, at this rate, he would still be able to take first place. Yes, this guy's skills were growing by leaps and bounds. Lloyd looked different now. The guy was focused and collected. It was as if the weapon had become part of his hand. He moved so easily and smoothly that it was disconcerting. The guy looked at his opponent as if he were a victim. She had to admit, reluctantly, that she couldn't beat this guy now. She had to accept that he was outmatched after all. However, it wasn't that simple. His words to think more broadly. She smiled. Okay, this was a game that could be played with two people. The girl smirked and said that it had taught her a good lesson. Good. In that case, she would take her time. The girl gripped the hilt of her weapon more firmly and decided to use a slightly different tactic. Let it go. Now he would feel what in vain had prompted her. Eventually, Lloyd ran out of steam. The guy had lost his head and felt like he was going to faint. His breathing was labored. It was still a little hard to beat this girl. He scratched the back of his head. He said in a tired voice that it was time to call it a day. Let him not overwork himself too much, but the final competition. Judith looked at him with a surprised look. That didn't sound like him at all. Usually he's the first to rush into action, and he's always bothering her with sparring. But now he's down? She didn't argue, however, but threw her sweater over her shoulder and went to her room. Okay. The guy looked at her in surprise. Wow, what is it with her begging sign did not even get angry. Green snow is going to fall. The girl replied that she had business to attend to. That answer was completely out of character for her. Something seemed to have happened. The boy asked her what her business was. The girl replied that curiosity had killed the cat, and she would kill him if he poked his nose into her business. Lloyd had no choice but to stare at her in surprise. She had definitely changed, but what was the reason for the change? Never mind. That's not the most important thing right now. He looked at his rapier and smiled. In his heart, he was delighted with himself. Yes, he had indeed changed. He had succeeded in overcoming his milestone. Now, he was fully confident that his goal would be possible. The boy swung his weapon and transformed. During his time at the academy, he had learned a lot and changed his habits. For a second, he thought that now he could really aim for a place next to Elijah. Now, after so much training, he didn't think that goal was so out of reach. Also, iron. That was the main thing. The boy had changed too. I mean, he'd changed beyond all recognition. Plus, we had to put Lloyd's plan into action. Now, he'd kill two hares with one stone. Now, he would be able to withstand his direct hit. The boy was incredibly pleased with himself. A smile shone on his face. It wasn't for nothing that he had pushed himself to the limit. Now his dream would come true, and no one would be able to prevent him from doing so. At this time, Iron was quietly meditating. He still decided to hold the sword in his hands for better concentration. The guy stood immovable and concentrated all his internal energy, but still, something was wrong. He still felt like it wasn't enough. He had already given up. He had changed the rack, changed the principle, but still no improvement. He He was beginning to lose heart. What about it? Still no change. Is he doing something wrong? The guy was ready to cry. His incomprehension was getting to him. He looked in front of him and sincerely tried to understand what he was doing wrong. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice and turned his head. Someone asked, "Isn't he tired of being stuck on the training ground all this time?" The boy looked in the direction where the voice had come from. I'll bet it was Judith. She was still looking at him with the same cheerful look, and her face was bruised, but it didn't seem to bother her. The girl said she had to go out for a while and get some air. It's a good thing, too. Elijah walked out of the house and decided to take a little walk. After all, she's been spending too much time at the training center, need to have some time of her own. Suddenly, she looked to the side and noticed something strange, so she looked closer. Something was definitely there that interested her. She saw two familiar silhouettes going somewhere. The girl looked closer. It was Judith and Iron. They were walking somewhere, not paying attention to anyone. Yes, they came to a wide and spacious meadow. The girl immediately flopped down on the soft grass. The boy sat down beside her. She said they would rest here for a while and then continue. The boy asked, "Is it possible to rest here?" The girl said that if they violated anything, they would be told and they would leave immediately. The boy did not, though, agree. She looked up at the sky and asked in a calm voice how he was doing with his training. Iron looked at her with a surprised look. With what kind of preparation? He still had to prepare for something? Judith replied that the final assessment was less than half a month away. Isn't he going to prepare? The guy realized what he was talking about and replied that he was still practicing as hard as ever, so what's the big deal? The girl yawned and said he was sluggish in his response. What's going on with him? He looked at her and asked, "What about her? Does she think she'll pass?" The question sounded a little out of tune, but the guy wasn't good at communicating, so it was forgivable. The girl replied irritably, "What kind of questions are these? It's obvious that he'll pass. Did he forget who his older sister was? You shouldn't have asked that. And if she could beat that nasty Elijah." As soon as the girl said her name, she immediately grimaced. Iron wondered, would she be able to overpower her? That question stumped him. They both looked up at the sky. Judith turned to him. How tactless he was. Iron guiltily said that she had, after all, asked him that question herself. So what's the problem? Judith flared up. What? He'll only listen to you. His answer is not sure again. The girl looked silently in front of her. She was thinking about something. A kind of uncertainty appeared on her face. She seemed to doubt her answer. After a little silence, she apologized for her rudeness. She seemed genuinely ashamed. Iron looked at her in surprise. It was the first time he had ever heard this girl apologize to anyone. The boy looked back at her. She yawned and said she apologized for not paying attention to him lately. She did say she would practice fighting with him and correct his faulty stances. The boy thought for a moment and stretched. I think he understood. He smiled, even a little pleased, and said he shouldn't worry about him. But Judith interrupted him and said she was an orphan. As soon as the boy heard that, his eyes widened, and he looked at his friend in surprise. This was something he didn't expect her to say. However, the girl said in a serious voice that she didn't start this conversation to be pitied here. She sank into her thoughts. Just being a small child, she had to survive by any means necessary. All she knew how to do was steal and pickpocket. That's basically what she'd been doing her whole conscious life. However, suddenly looking around her, it became clear to her that the rest of the people were dragging their existence the same way, beating everyone indiscriminately, adults and children alike. And at that moment, it was as if it hit her. The girl hesitated and looked up at the sky. Her voice was unusually calm, and she spoke as if she were a normal person, not a bullied girl. Until now, living like this, she'd never felt grateful to anyone. She had never said the word, "thank you." At that moment, she even felt a little sad. She stood up and said that's why when he pulled her out of the lake, she should have thanked him for saving her. However, she was angry. Truth be told, even now it felt uncomfortable to say thank you out in the open. She was saying it so calmly and freely that it felt like someone had replaced her. She looked at Aaron and said so she was going to pay him back in her own way, but in the end, things got murky. So, let him pass. She looked at him with a serious look. The boy looked at her in surprise. What was she talking about? Make sure you pass the final evaluation. The girl smiled and was now more like herself. Let him pass, shed his status as a pre-training student, become an official student of the academy, and let her help him normally so that there would be no more awkwardness left. The girl looked up at him and smiled in a sort of friendly, warm smile. Iron nodded. He was incredibly pleased to feel that he had such a friend in this world, and more than one, by the way. The girl was embarrassed, and coughing rose to her feet. She seemed to have let herself go a little too far. The girl said that if she went together now, she thought she would die of shame on the way. So let her wait for about 5 minutes and then go. She said nothing more, and went about her business at a brisk pace. Iron stared after her. But should she be the one to apologize? His mind was all jumbled up. On the contrary, to those who for the past 2 months had paid no attention to anyone, attention was he himself. The boy finally realized all this, and a kind of sadness settled in him. If one looked through the windows, 2 small silhouettes could be seen, one of which was rapidly moving away with a quick gait. The boy sat alone in the meadow. He was thinking. It seems that he managed to change a lot during this time, which is quite good now. He can at least a little bit proud with himself. The boy was very happy about this change in himself. He looked ahead at the beautiful sunset, which gave the last rays of the sun, giving its warmth to the earth. And now he was sitting here, looking up at the sky. The thought flashed through his mind that his first year at the academy wasn't so bad, so it was okay. Iron looked smilingly ahead. He thought he recognized himself a little better and was grateful for everything he could feel right now because of the current thought. The boy felt an incredible lightness and purity within himself. He had never felt like this before. He felt truly alive now. He walked into the training room where there were a lot of weapons. All the while, the guy reflected that his friends and instructors had helped him a lot in his formation. He was very grateful to them for that. So now it was his time to repay them for their support. The boy took up his weapon and began practicing his blows without any help. He made a firm decision that his fate was now in his hands. The guy looked confidently in front of him. Now he would put all his strength into training, and even more. He didn't want to give up. He had traveled such a long way, overcome many obstacles. An entire universe with billions of stars appeared before him. The boy concentrated. All his inner energy seemed to form one big stream. He equalized his breathing, and it was as if he merged with his surroundings. The guy closed his eyes. He was relaxed, but focused at the same time. He finally understood how to do it. His whole body seemed to glow, his muscles tensed. The guy stood holding his sword and prepared himself. Now he felt something different, something very subtle, but at the same time, something that changed him to the core. The boy stood firm on his feet. The instructor was shouting. He was saying something very loudly so that all the students could finally hear him. The man was literally tearing up his voice. There must have been something going on, something important that everyone was waiting for. Indeed, there were many students gathered in the main hall. They were standing in front of the instructors, and the founder was also there, evaluating the other students. It was necessary to see what they had accomplished during this training period. 1210. A small green leaf was falling to the ground. It seemed to be something like practicing concentration. One of the students froze in place, waiting for the right moment. A leaf fell on his head. Several more leaves swirled around him. The boy stood motionless, gathering his strength. Suddenly he twitched and chopped all several leaves in one blow. He had timed it just right, and now he had done it perfectly. The boy was terribly concentrated, for this was his most important mission. Even the supervisor was surprised. He whistled and said that this student's speed and concentration were just great. Isn't he from Class B? The instructor replied that even among the low-scoring pre-service students, there are plenty of kids who improve their skills quite quickly. Maybe after the final evaluation, their rating will change. Another boy stood near the stone. He swung and tried to cut it down. He gathered all his strength and energy to put it into this blow. The boy was a little afraid, but he quickly pulled himself together. He swung his sword wide and struck the stone sharply. A slight cracking sound was heard, and the guy exhaled. The blow was really good. The stone was cut in half, and the fact that it was a wooden sword was a good result. The cut is oblique, not perpendicular, but it looks incredibly even. It's an excellent result. The apprentices never ceased to amaze. The supervisor smiled and squinted his eyes. Of course, all the students are performing beyond his expectation, and yet the old man was upset about something. Amid took a piece of paper and announced the next student. The man paused for a moment and looked over to where the other students were standing. Judith was next. The instructor invited her to join them. Tense, it was obvious from her face that she was worried, though she was careful to hide it. The girl tensed up. The girl approached the supervisor and asked one very interesting question. She asked if she could take the test with another student. The instructors wondered, what is she talking about? This was the first time this had happened to them. The girl smiled and said in a cheerful voice that she thought a duel would allow them both to show their strengths more fully. The student she wanted to take the final assessment with didn't seem to mind. The old man smiled. All right, that sounded not bad at all. This disciple too? He continued to look at the girl with a good-natured gaze. She said in a serious voice that it was Brad Lloyd. The boy stepped out from the rest of the mass of students and headed toward them with a quick stride. The boy was completely confident too. The instructor smiled, but still authorized this kind of duel. They stood opposite each other and got ready. Each of them was tense to the max. They realized that their future success would depend on how they performed. The boys were totally focused. Lloyd held out his sword and asked the girl in a cocky voice, "So, is she ready?" There was a smile on the guy's face, a little smug, but that was his style. The girl was a little embarrassed and looked down at her weapon. She seemed to have something to say, but she tried to hold her pause. She spoke uncertainly. The girl said that she didn't want to rush today, but it looked like it wasn't going to work today. The guy looked at her with surprised eyes and didn't understand anything. What's she gardening? Judith paused for a moment and continued speaking. She seemed to want to endure the moment. Then she shouted in a voice full of confidence that today she would surpass him. The girl grasped her weapon and rushed straight into the attack. Now this was like the real Judith, the same as always. The guy smiled, but finally she was back to her old self. That's great, just like her. The boy smiled and happily rushed forward to attack. She crouched down and prepared to jump. The girl grouped herself and gathered all her strength into this one punch. Now she had to do it right to prove her skill she had learned over the months. The girl jumped high up and swung her weapon. Lloyd managed to block her blow with great difficulty. She was incredibly fast, even faster than in training. She seemed to have had a good workout at this time. The boy blocked her blows, but she kept coming harder and harder. The girl fought as if her life depended on it. Sparks even flew in different directions. The sight was very mesmerizing. Everyone even fell silent for a second. The students watched with their mouths open, the hum of battle echoing throughout the hall. Everyone fell silent, their gazes fixed on the stunning duel. The boy was certainly skillful at blocking blows, but he was finding it harder and harder to do so each time. He didn't expect the girl to grow so much in her skills. It was already difficult. If he had been able to easily block her blows then, he would have to try harder now. Judith continued her onslaught. The girl looked at him not as a rival, but as a victim. Fury glittered in her eyes. The girl was not going to back down for a second. Her eyes narrowed, and she pressed on harder and harder. Their battle became a real fight, a fight to the death. There was an incomprehensible rumble, gun blows, and battle cries everywhere. It was truly a mesmerizing sight. Lloyd now realized he needed to back up a bit. The boy took 2 steps back to get out of the line of attack. The girl was acting very differently. He felt like he couldn't stand up to her now. She made a sharp lunge towards him, at the last moment managing to dodge. The sword blade flew just a centimeter from his head. Even for a second, he felt a little scared for his life. He hadn't seen such rage in a long time. So far, he had only managed to dodge and get out of the line of attack. The girl wouldn't let him attack. He jumped, bouncing farther and farther away. It was even a little scary. Another lightning-fast strike. The boy managed to dodge the blow, but it was getting harder and harder to stay in one position. His eyes glittered with genuine fear of defeat, but now for his own life. It wasn't like her at all, or rather, like her, but not that much. The students stood and looked at it with admiration. Even Lloyd's henchmen were amazed at the girl's speed. They didn't expect their lord to be so helpless. The guy bounced back a fair distance. However, Judith continued to cut him down. The girl wasn't going to just let him go. It was even a little scary. She was running at him like an angry bull, and to defend himself, he put his weapon forward. He could only parry her blows so far. The onslaught was just on a whole other level. Still, he managed to find a moment and swing his rapier. He decided to put all his precision and concentration into this strike to finally break this series of attacks. He swung his wooden sword, but it was as if the girl had seen it all beforehand and jumped up. The guy didn't even have time to realize it. It was even a little scary. It jumped up so high that the kid had to look up to see it. What the hell is that? Where'd she get that kind of speed? What was she even doing all this time to be so successful and begging for a sign? It was a mystery stuck in his head. There was no time to think, however. The girl jumped up once more and swung her huge cleaver. Her eyes glittered with a true desire to win. It was obvious that she had no intention of retreating, so the guy would have to try very hard to at least survive or match her. However, he wasn't so easy either. when the girl hit him as hard as she could. He deftly parried her blow by taking his arm aside. The blow was very strong, but for now they were almost on equal footing. Yes, Judith was faster, however Lloyd was accurate. The instructor looked at all of this with eyes wide open with amazement. The two of them were truly both astonishing. This was the first time he had ever seen something like this, for the students to be at such a prohibitive level. They were jumping away from each other and dodging. It was like a series of explosions. It was almost impossible to keep track of them now. The speed was staggering. They literally teleported. But how did they manage to reach that level? The girl was striking with impressive speed. Lloyd was trying to defend himself. His parrying skills were at a high level, allowing him to deftly dodge. And so, Amid looked at them. Judith's punches were indeed ruthless. However, her opponent was not amiss either. It was a mesmerizing sight. Even an instructor such as him was impressed. However, her opponent easily deflected all of her lightning-fast attacks. It was an incredible sight. The guy really was incredibly talented. The boy was alert. He saw a window he could squeeze through. His eyes narrowed. He realized he had to attack now. The girl hesitated, had to seize the moment. He made a sharp lunge towards her. His concentration had reached its limit. Now, he had seized the initiative. He made a sharp lunge, and Judith didn't have time to dodge. The girl almost dropped her weapon from her hands. That would have been a failure. She managed to dodge, but the blade of the wooden sword still touched her face. A small scratch appeared on her face. However, it didn't seem to have weakened her strength, but it even seemed to have energized her more. She clenched her teeth and attacked again. They found themselves facing each other, all of them already at their limits, and the girl slowed and equalized her breathing. She was furious. What a jerk. She didn't expect Lloyd to attack her in such a sneaky manner. She was seething with rage, that bastard. How did this happen? The boy smiled and mockingly asked, "Did she want to overpower his begging sign with that? Don't let him get his hopes up. He's not that easy either." The girl heard these words and became furious. She immediately attacked with renewed vigor. It was as if she had a second breath. They were moving so fast that it was like some kind of frenzied dance. Are they definitely students? Judith's swinging. Harder! She must hit harder. The girl decided to put all her strength and power into this blow to defeat him by all means. The guy thought he needed to be even more precise. One more precise lunge. He'll win for sure. This is so much fun. This battle was beginning to bring them pleasure. They came dangerously close to each other, and there was a sound, like an explosion. Shards and flashes of light flew in different directions. It felt like two demons fighting with each other. After the impact, everyone was shocked. The dust began to settle, and now a busy picture was revealed before their eyes. Everyone stared directly at the duelists to see the outcome of the battle. Judith was standing aside. She was covered in abrasions. She was literally steaming. She was holding her weapon, which was unfortunately broken. The blow was too strong after all, even too much. The weapon failed. Lloyd stood beside her, his weapon intact. The guy was grinning smugly and he was holding a rapier. Looks like we know who won today. They stood like that for a few seconds, unable to realize that the battle was over. Only their heavy breathing could be heard around them. The battle had been truly impressive. The girl even felt a little hurt for a second. She clutched her broken weapon one more time. It looked like she had failed this time too. It was incredibly frustrating, but she would win another time. The instructors, along with the founder, were sitting in their seats. Lun said that they were practically on the same level. Karaka nodded his head, however. He thought that someone was more skillful after all. The elder stood between them and didn't say anything. Still, Lloyd seems to be the more skillful one. He had won in the end. The boy smiled smugly. He felt his superiority, and it was the sweetest feeling of his life. A smile showed on his face. The founder looked at them with a warm smile. A terrific result. A wonderful duel. They were both big, well done. Everyone seemed to be incredibly satisfied. The hall exploded with applause. Judith and her opponent bowed. They glanced at each other. Both students were at their limits. However, it was indeed a great duel. The founder looked at the instructor and asked, who would be next? He couldn't wait to see the next candidate. The old man even rubbed his palms together. He had great anticipation about the next contestant. Judith and Lloyd tensed up too. Who would be next? The boys looked at the instructors with surprised eyes. Something interesting was about to happen. Ilya Linje was next. The girl walked out to them with a proud gait, head held high. A true aristocrat. She seemed to have an overly serious expression on her face. Indeed, this was a momentous meeting for her. Now she had to show what she could do, otherwise it would be a disgrace to her and her family. Lloyd stood beside her and smiled. He had outdone himself. Maybe he could fight her too. He smiled as he realized how strong he was. They missed each other. The girl didn't even look in his direction, but walked confidently forward. At the same time, the guy was smiling behind her back. The girl seemed to be dissatisfied with something. She didn't want to see that annoying guy. The founder looked at the next contestant and asked what she was going to show him. The girl stood in front of them with her hands at the seams. She was incredibly collected, basically as always, but now in a special way. She looked at the old man and said that she would demonstrate the family sword technique to them. The girl said this in a calm yet firm voice. She seemed to be too serious, even more than usual. The old man laughed. The Ball of Heaven. The same legendary technique that slit the throat of the demonic dragon king? Great. The old man laughed. It seems like he's about to see something interesting. The girl took her weapon in her hands. It was a small, elegant sword. She prepared herself. Her body tensed, and now she was ready to show absolutely everything she had in her arsenal. Lloyd's plan seems to have worked. He looked at the girl with smiling eyes. Now she's going to show off her family technique. After all, he was right. The kid. What he saw, however, made him stop a little. The girl raised her sword upwards. Some kind of incomprehensible light began to develop everywhere. It was as if several spotlights had been turned on in one fell swoop. The blade rushed out. She began to demonstrate her technique. The girl swung her weapon with such ease and speed that no one even noticed it. A vortex began to rise around her. The wind was getting stronger and stronger. In the end, it turned into a real hurricane that filled the entire exam hall. It was even a little scary. No one expected to see such power. Karaka wondered, what's the wind? It seemed it was beginning to dawn on him what he was about to see. Goosebumps ran down the former instructor's back. If this is the technique he thinks it is, something amazing is about to happen. The wind around was getting stronger and stronger. It was a real vortex that filled the whole space. People started to cover their faces so that nothing would fly there. The girl was standing incredibly firmly on her feet at this time. She was demonstrating a technique that had been passed down in her family for generations. It was an incredibly important moment for her. Time after time, she swung her sword until she had the wind up to speed. It was even getting a little cold. The girl wasn't going to stop, her hands acting as if on automatic. Even the girl's face has changed. The friendliness was gone. Her gaze became cold and serious. It was like that of an experienced killer warrior who had seen more than one battle. The girl was spinning. It was a crazy dance. A vortex of air began to form around her. Even the air itself began to electrify and glow. It was a real tornado. The family technique was truly impressive. Even the instructors, along with the founder, who had seen a lot, slightly closed their eyes, blinding white light. It was an incredible sight. Such a thing they had not seen among the students for a long time. They closed their eyes so as not to be blinded. The instructors were completely shocked. It was something they didn't see very often, especially not from students. It was just impossible. Ahmed closed his eyes with his hands. The man was even a little scared, despite all his combat experience. This was the kind of technique that sent shivers down his spine. Who is this girl? Who is this girl who has such power? Judith and Lloyd were standing nearby, staring at the whole thing in genuine amazement. Judith and Lloyd were standing nearby, staring in genuine amazement. Goosebumps ran down their backs, as they had seen such a thing for the first time in their lives. Judith was in complete shock. She was frightened, so much so that she was speechless. Her eyes were full of delight. She didn't even know how to react. What she had just seen was something amazing. The wind slowly began to dissipate. The sight was truly breathtaking. The girl was standing in the middle of all this splendor, and now looked like a real ancient warrior. The wind was still flying everywhere, raising pillars of dust in the air. It was the sword of heaven after all. The instructor and the supervisor looked at it all with genuine delight. The man was impressed. The instructor whispered with just his lips. The old man looked at the girl and squinted his eyes. As soon as he saw it, he lost his tongue. The guy didn't know what to say. He had just seen an incredibly amazing technique. This level was almost impossible to achieve. He looked at the girl who stood as thin as a matchstick. Her stance was perfect. In her hands, she held a weapon so strong, so sure, that she seemed to be born with it in her hands. It was indescribable. And then the boy realized that there really was this insurmountable wall between them that was almost impossible to climb over. He felt like he was at rock bottom. Compared to this girl's technique, he was just an annihilation. He felt like he was standing in front of a huge rock that couldn't be moved. What was he even thinking? The guy clenched his teeth, feeling incredibly bad about himself. and the fact that he realized how insignificant he looked now. The boy was silent, and he didn't say anything. The boy was distracted from his musings by Judith. She yanked him up and told him there was one last one left. The girl looked toward the stage with some excitement. Yes, there was only one contestant left, and they knew exactly who it was. Now it's Iron's turn. The boy walked out with a confident gait and looked around the hall. He walked as if he was about to fight a monster, not to show off his skills. The boy seemed to be taking it a little too seriously. Guy was walking to the stage and heard Judith yell, "Good luck." He turned around and looked at her with a smile. He was very lucky to have such friends as he had. The boy was glad of that. At this point, Lloyd was freaking out. No, don't Iron. The guy was afraid of something that was sitting deep in his soul. Iron was approaching the center of the stage. The boy clenched his fist in his hands. Lloyd was very nervous. Something was bothering him very much, and he couldn't calm down and pull himself together. He was all nervous, trying to bring himself to his senses, but it was not working well. Suddenly, he heard Iron's voice saying that he was a very good man indeed. Lloyd turned to the boy and asked in surprise, "What does he mean by that?" A look of incomprehension appeared on his face. "Why the speeches? He's nervous enough as it is." Iron continued to speak in a calm voice. The boy was smiling and seemed to be in good spirits. The atmosphere around him is always warm and bright. It becomes when he is around him. That's probably why a lot of people want to be his friend. Lloyd looked at him in surprise and asked, "How can he be so calm to say such things?" Iron laughed. "Did he do something wrong? Again?" Lloyd said he was wrong, and Iron looked at him with a surprised look. The boy looked down and said in a quiet voice that he seemed to have made a mistake. He wasn't as good a person as he might seem at first glance. The guy was clearly upset about something. He was sad, and all he wanted to do was stare at the floor. He wanted to say something, but the words were jumbled. He couldn't get his thoughts in order. Aaron nodded his head and moved forward towards the stage. Behind his back was the huge sword he had been practicing with all this time. The boy was in very good spirits, so it looked like everything would work out. Lloyd at this time was just out of his mind. The guy clenched his teeth and tried to come to his senses, but it did not work well. Inwardly, he was begging his friend, just begging as hard as he could. Iron didn't see it. He was just walking onto the stage with a firm conviction to show all he could do. Lloyd stood nearby, trembling. He was either scared or angry about something. The boy couldn't get himself under control. He was nervous, visibly nervous, and what was bothering him was getting closer. He grimaced and internally asked his friend not to show anything outstanding. The guy just couldn't control himself. He was scared. He wanted someone to be worse than him. At least, that's how it seemed. Iron stood in the middle of the stage and looked at the academy manager. The boy was a little scared. All eyes were turned towards him. It was quite a crucial moment. The old man smiled broadly. This seemed to be the student he wanted to see the most. He asked what Iron was going to show them today. The old man crossed his arms and assumed an expectant pose. The boy looked in front of him with a serious look and frowned. He seemed to be thinking about something, and there was silence, everyone wanting to know what this negligent student was about to show them. Everyone fell silent, and for a second, there was complete silence. Everyone was startled and not a little surprised by what Iron had said. The guys looked at him with round eyes. No one had expected him to say something like that. The boy said in a voice firm with confidence that he would now demonstrate a perpendicular sword strike to them. He said it as seriously as if it was something outstanding. The old man smiled. He seemed to understand everything at that moment. All that was left was to sit and wait. The instructor was surprised and even a little disappointed. Judith seemed ready to fall to the ground in shame. Lance, who was sitting nearby, exploded with indignation. Did he hit his head? Wake up, they're in the final evaluation. There's a secret technique you have to show, even so they're at risk of flying, and he's going to throw out a perpendicular section? Oh my God. Suddenly, the instructor turned to him and interrupted his indignation. He warned that if the boy allowed himself to do such a thing, he would be expelled immediately. His friend sitting next to him looked at him with a frightened look. Is he out of his mind? The boy immediately came to his senses and trembled. The instructor thought, yes, he did stop him after all, but still the boy is saying sensible things. It does look very strange from the outside, doesn't it? Doesn't Iron think about it? But the instructor stopped his thinking. It's still a summative assessment. You have to follow the rules. The man frowned. What does Iron want to demonstrate at such an important moment with a perpendicular section that can't even be called a real combat technique? What the hell was he thinking? The instructor looked at Iron with a surprised look, but the boy held his weapon in his hands and readied himself as if not paying attention to them. The boy exhaled. He put his thoughts in order, cleared his head, and tried to concentrate. There was nothing to think about right now except his own technique. He dismissed absolutely everything that was in his way. The guy stood very strong. He held his weapon, which had become a part of his body over the long time of training. He even closed his eyes to concentrate better. Darkness formed around him, completely silent and very viscous. The founder observed, "Well, now the boy will show it, showing the technique he's wanted to see for so long." His face spread into a smile. Now he would see what he had wanted to see all these years. He would see that very craftsmanship, the skill of that man who was unwilling to learn from him. The old man remembered something that had been lurking in the corners of his memory for so many years, a smile growing wider and wider on his face. He looked at the Aaron who stood in the center of the podium, preparing to demonstrate his skill. The boy was completely serious. His eyes were hard, his gaze determined, and his gait incredibly light. The old man literally went crazy with anticipation. "Come on, boy. Let him show him the technique, the one that didn't react to his blade dance." Now the old man was simply ecstatic. Time lingered. Iron was still standing with his weapon in his hands, but he didn't seem to be doing anything. He just seemed to be preparing. The boy breathed, equalizing his breathing. All the students fell silent and watched him. Absolutely all eyes were fixed on him. There were guys sitting in the stands, looking at each other in surprise. Why is he doing nothing and standing there? Elijah seemed to be starting to understand something. The girl even tensed up. Her eyes widened at what she saw. It's meditation. The guy was meditating, gathering his thoughts. Iron wasn't paying attention to anyone at all. The boy was just holding the sword and trying to get as close to him as possible, to equalize his breathing, free his mind. His mind was empty. Any thoughts disappeared. He exhaled. His soul came to complete peace. He stopped his heartbeat for a second. He gripped the weapon tightly in his hands, straining every muscle to the limit to group himself. The boy stood. This was truly his star, tensing his body, as much as was even possible. Concentrate, discard everything unnecessary, and concentrate on his tool. The boy breathed easily. It was as if he was not here, not in the training room, somewhere very far away. He plunged into the depths of his consciousness, his soul, which was now completely calm. It was as if the boy found himself standing on water in the middle of a huge lake, which was without a single wave. This place was the depths of his soul. So calm, so poised, the guy brought himself to his senses. He still doesn't know who this man is that appears in his dreams. Suddenly he felt a huge wave coming towards him. It covered him completely. The boy stood immovable. He looked at the huge column of water that was rising and moving towards him with monstrous speed. He did not know who this person was, who had appeared out of the water. He did not know why she carried all those blows that appeared so often in his dreams. He knew nothing at all now. Now, however, something was beginning to become clear. He looked into the man's face, which was covered by long gray hair. An eye, as pure and clear as his own, appeared. Now, everything made sense to the boy. Now, however, things have changed. As long as she is at will, with patience. The man swung. He swung his weapon as hard as he could. It was some other different blow, as long as he is able to move forward. Iron grasped the guns and swung around as well. The boy ran straight forward. He clenched his teeth and prepared himself as much as he could. And his body shrank, all consciousness released. It was empty now. He raised his sword. As long as he could move forward, he only needed one. He gripped the cold hilt of the weapon tightly and prepared to make a single strike, a strike that lay absolutely everything. The old man looked at him with his clear eyes, still as mute, yet his eyes spoke more than any words created by human language. The eyes were clear and pure. Iron looked straight into them. His mind cleared too. He only needed one thing, his remaining will, the will that led him through this path. The boy put all his strength into this blow. He swung his blade and let it drop to the ground with such force that even the air seemed to heat up. The guy unleashed all the power that had been inside of him up to that point. There was an explosion, as if someone had fired a cannon. The wind blew. It became a real hurricane moving forward. The floor began to shake. Everything began to crack. Something incredible was happening here. The guys who had been mocking him now opened their mouths in amazement. They didn't know what they were watching, but what they saw was incredibly exciting and terrifying at the same time. Goosebumps ran down their backs, and they were even a little scared. The instructor, who had seen a lot of things in his life, opened his mouth in surprise and didn't know what to say. He was almost blown away by the wind and wanted to be somewhere else, but not here. Elijah was in complete shock. From such a boy who could barely hold a sword, she certainly didn't expect to see something like this, something that would strike her to the core. Up went the rocks that flew high up like toy stones. Lloyd looked at it all, omit in his eyes. He realized that it was all over now. The boy didn't know how he should react to it all. Goosebumps were running down his back. After such a powerful impact, a huge crack was left on the floor. No, it was a real rift. Even a powerful structure like the Academy that had withstood a single storm in its life couldn't bear such a blow. Iron looked at everyone with a kind of madness. The boy had put all his strength into that punch. There was steam coming from his body. He couldn't feel anything yet. It was as if his body stopped listening to him. For a second, he felt the knowledge being lost. Judith's eyes widened in surprise as she looked at all this. She didn't expect to see something like this from this kid because it was unthinkable. How could he have such power? Lloyd stood beside her, clenching his fist so hard that his hands bled, horrified, stunned, and at the same time discouraged. The girl saw this and looked at her comrade with a surprised look. What's wrong with him? She seemed to notice how bad the guy felt after that ride. He stood and trembled with fear. He was really scared. Really scared, like he had been before. The boy looked at it all with a mesmerized gaze. His whole body was shaking, his hands were clenched so tightly that he was bleeding. The founder looked at all this with a squint in his eyes. He was more than satisfied. It was clear from his gaze that he had expected nothing less. Moreover, the boy even managed to not only meet his expectations, but even exceed them. Finally, the grading was over. The old man's voice sounded. It seemed that the students were already waiting for the results. Well, they wouldn't wait any longer. They should move on to the announcement of the final results. Everyone held their breath. The old man took out a piece of paper, and with a smile on his face, he began to read. Letting the final grades be the deciding factor, their current rankings were not an indicator of whether or not they would enroll. Since there's still a summative talk left, so the man will start at the end. The hall held its breath. 66th place, Peter Nelson. Everyone was curious to see what their results would be. The students began to whisper. The man announced the results of the exam, and everyone jumped up from their seats with each time. Some rejoiced, some worried, some cried. Judith was in 4th place. The girl looked at it all with surprise. Was she only in 4th? She felt a chill run down her spine. It was lower than she had expected, but it wasn't over yet. Lloyd was in 3rd place. The boy exhaled. It was worse than he had expected. He hated himself for it, really. He had worked so hard to equal 1st place, and he had only ended up in 3rd. What a bummer. Smiling, the old man said that Iron was in 2nd place. A satisfied smile flashed across his face. The man was happy to announce the result. Iron looked at him in surprise. The boy hadn't expected to be that high. When he entered the academy, he was in the penultimate place. And now, he was one of the leaders. He opened his mouth in surprise. It just couldn't be. Did he really make it? Elijah was in 1st place, just like she said she would be. Well, it couldn't have been any other way. The man smiled and said that everyone did a great job. As for the conversation, not to be announced later, but now let them enter and have a good rest. A girl was walking down the street, heading towards her gym. She was looking for someone, and she knew for sure that the person she was looking for was here. The girl walked to the door. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside. There was a humming sound. Someone was practicing, and practicing hard. She already knew who it was. She'd found who she was looking for. The girl smiled and said she knew she was going here. No one else would go to the training room at a time like this when everyone was told to rest. The girl said this with some pride or something. No one would have come here the day after the exam. Iron stood and practiced even harder. The boy waved his sword. He said hello to a girl he didn't expect to see here. They sat down on the nearest bench. For a few seconds, there was an awkward silence between them, neither of them knowing where to start the conversation, as there was still some residue from the previous quarrel. The girl took the initiative and said that the boy was much stronger than last time. Iron was surprised, their humming. He hadn't expected praise from such a man. She continued. The girl said that Lloyd and Judith had performed quite well too. A smile spread across her face. It had been a long time since she had felt like someone was chasing her. 1st place was a long shot, and before, she would have been disappointed. But now it was different. She smiled and said it was even a little fun now. She seemed to be genuinely glad for that. His punch was very intimidating. Aaron even crouched down a bit from such a thing. The girl said that with a smile. Iron was embarrassed and started stammering to say that her sword technique was impressive, even just unbelievable and. The guy blushed, the girl laughed, and asked, "Isn't he used to being praised?" She made a sad expression on her face. Suddenly her voice became serious, and the girl said that she wouldn't stay in the academy. She has to continue her journey. So now she's leaving. As soon as Iron heard this, his face transformed as well. But how? Why? Not understanding anything, he was terrified at the realization of this thought. How was this even possible? It was as if someone had slapped him on the back. The girl noticed it and tried not to laugh. It was an interesting reaction. No one had ever reacted like that before. The guy looked down. He didn't want to seem awkward, but he was embarrassed. His cheeks reddened. He said it was just so sudden and unexpected. The girl smiled and began to explain. The boy listened to her carefully. She said that the truth was that she had no intention of becoming an official student from the beginning. She planned to take first place in the midterm and final assessment and then return to her family. She was sad and a little serious. She turned to the boy. Iron looked at her in surprise. She said, did he know who was called the true genius of the continent? The boy wasn't sure. He hadn't heard of it at all. Elijah Sayed, that was the name of a man named Kyle Linjay. The last name suggested it was her brother. It was her older brother, a guy in his early 20s who had a strange, sad, and very serious face. He was looking through time. The girl started her story. Her voice was a little shaky. It was hard for her to remember, but she seemed to want to share it with someone, not to keep it all to herself. She started her story from the time when she was 7 years old and very young. She said that at that age, her brother had become so popular that he was known by almost every person on the continent. He was truly a universal hero, admired and proud. When he was 10 years old, he managed to defeat a knight in a duel, completely defeating him. Even then, he had already reached unprecedented heights thanks to his outstanding talent. Of course, after this, he was recognized by many famous people. He got his good name, and he became famous on the continent already as the strongest genius among all. They had high hopes for him. The guy was generally a general favorite, admired by all. He was a role model for them, for courage, for perseverance, for talent. A real inspiration. Suddenly, there was another genius, who was a simple burgher by birth, claimed to have won first place in the academy, but refused to become his student. It was a girl named Ignata. At the age of 14, she started her own mercenary squad. She had a rather defiant look, and of course immediately challenged her brother. Of course, a man guilty of his chivalric duty could not stand aside and not accept a challenge to a duel. So he immediately agreed. He had no other choice. He immediately entered the duel. Besides, their family never avoided challenges, so he immediately went for the duel. This promised to be his triumph.